A flash of light cut through the murky depths. Eli's heartbeat thundered in his ears, mixing with the rhythmic hiss of his regulator. 20 feet below the surface, visibility extended barely an arm's length in any direction. The beam of his underwater flashlight caught something metallic, sending a golden reflection dancing through the green-black water. "Dad, I found something!" June's excited voice crackled through the underwater communication system. Before Eli could respond, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision. Then another, dark silhouettes converging on their position with purposeful precision. A red laser sight cut through the water, creating an eerie crimson line that settled on June's oxygen tank. "June, get down!" Eli lunged toward his daughter as a muffled pop sent bubbles exploding around them. Something metal pinged off a nearby rock. A bullet. The radio crackled again. "Mason, you have one chance. Give us the coordinates or your daughter dies down here." 10 months earlier, the weathered fishing boat sat behind Murphy's bait shop like a forgotten grave. 32 feet of peeling paint and rusted metal, all that remained of Robert Mason's legacy to his son. For the townspeople of Harbor's End, it was just another confirmation of what they already believed. Eli Mason was a failure. First his wife taken by cancer, then his savings drained by medical bills, now crawling back to his hometown with nothing but debt and a 10-year-old daughter who deserved better. Here comes Eli Mason with nothing to show for his life but heartbreak and that worthless pile of driftwood his old man left him, they whispered. Standing before the rotting vessel, Eli could almost hear their judgments carried on the salt-tinged breeze. His daughter June tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, are we going to have to live in the boat now?" she asked, her voice small but unafraid. Eli forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. We've got the room at the inn for now." He studied the boat, the weathered dream according to the faded lettering on her stern. His father had been many things: cold, distant, absent for most of Eli's childhood, but never careless. Robert Mason had methodically pursued something for decades, something that had kept him away from his family and ultimately cost him his life. As the morning fog rolled in from the Atlantic, wrapping the harbor in its familiar gray embrace, Eli noticed something peculiar. The boat's exterior might be decaying, but the padlock securing the cabin door was new. Across the harbor, a black sedan pulled up. 3 men in expensive suits emerged, scanning the docks with practiced efficiency. "Dad," June said, her eyes fixed on the boat's cabin, "I think I saw something glowing inside." Harbor's End had always been the kind of town where everyone knew your business before you did. The morning fog rolled in from the Atlantic like clockwork, wrapping the weathered buildings in gray silence before the sun burned it away to reveal another day of the same conversations, the same faces, the same predictable rhythms. Eli Mason had grown up counting those fog-wrapped mornings, dreaming of the day he'd leave this suffocating familiarity behind. Now 38 years old and standing in the gravel parking lot behind Murphy's bait shop, he wondered if coming back had been surrender or the only choice he had left. "She's been sitting there since your old man passed," came a gravelly voice behind him. Eli turned to see Murphy himself emerging from the bait shop, wiping his hands on a stained apron. Tom Murphy had been ancient when Eli was a boy, and the years hadn't been kind. His face was a roadmap of sun damage and hard living, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence of a man who had spent his life reading weather and water. "Tom," Eli nodded, unsure of what else to say. The last time they'd spoken, Eli had been 17 and full of rage about his father's latest disappearance. "Heard you were back in town. Sorry about Sarah." Murphy's condolences carried the weight of genuine sympathy. Small towns had their flaws, but they also had long memories for both pain and kindness. "Thank you." The words came out rougher than Eli intended. Even 9 months after the cancer had taken his wife, speaking about it felt like swallowing glass. Murphy gestured toward the boat. "Your father used to come by every few weeks, just sat there looking at her, sometimes for hours. Never said much, but I could tell she meant something to him." Eli felt his jaw tighten. She meant more to him than his son ever did. "That's not true, boy, and you know it." The voice belonged to Mrs. Chen, who had appeared as if materialized from the morning air. Elena Chen was Harbor's End's unofficial keeper of hearts and secrets. A widow who'd raised 3 children and half the town strays with equal measures of fierce love and practical wisdom. She'd been at Eli's refuge during the worst of his childhood storms. Mrs. Chen, despite everything, Eli found himself almost smiling. She looked exactly the same. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, cardigan that had seen better decades, and eyes that missed nothing. Elena is fine, dear. You're not 12 anymore. She studied his face with the intensity of someone reading a familiar book for changes. Though you look like you haven't been sleeping much, it's been a difficult year, I imagine. And how is June handling all this? At the mention of his daughter, some of the tension left Eli's shoulders. She's stronger than I am, always has been. Children often are. They haven't learned yet that the world is supposed to break their hearts. Mrs. Chen moved closer to the boat, running her fingers along the weathered gunwale with surprising gentleness. Your father loved this boat, you know, but not for the reasons you think. I don't want to hear about my father's loves, Eli said, the old bitterness rising like bile in his throat. He made his choices clear enough when I was growing up. June appeared around the corner of the bait shop, her long brown hair streaming behind her, cheeks flushed from the short run from their lodging. At 10, she had her mother's grace and her father's stubborn chin, along with a curiosity that seemed to expand daily. Dad, you left without eating breakfast again, she said, slightly out of breath, but wearing the expression of someone who'd appointed herself the family's voice of reason. I had coffee. Coffee isn't breakfast. Mrs. Patterson at the diner said, coffee is what grown-ups drink when they're pretending they're not hungry. Mrs. Chen laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Smart girl, takes after her mother. June was studying the boat with intense focus. It's bigger than I thought it would be, she said finally. And sadder like it's been waiting for someone to remember it exists. She climbed onto a weathered crate to get a better look at the deck. Can we go inside? I don't think that's safe, sweetheart. The whole thing might be rotting through. But Murphy was already moving toward the boat, pulling out a set of keys from his pocket. Actually, your father had me check on her regular like. Structure's sound enough. Needs work, sure, but she's not falling down anytime soon. Eli watched as Murphy unlocked a small padlock, securing a canvas tarp over the cabin entrance. The metallic sound seemed to echo in the morning air, and for a moment Eli felt something twist in his chest. Anticipation mixed with dread. The cabin door swung open to reveal an interior that was surprising in its preservation. While the exterior of the boat had surrendered to weather and time, the inside told a different story. The small galley was clean, if dated. Charts and navigation equipment sat neatly arranged on a fold-down table. Cushions on the small berth looked recently aired. June was already climbing down the short ladder into the cabin, her natural fearlessness overriding any adult caution. Dad, there are so many books down here. And maps. Eli followed her down, Murphy and Mrs. Chen peering in from above. The cabin was cramped but organized, everything secured in the way of someone who understood boats and weather. Charts covered one wall, held in place by thin wooden strips. A small bookshelf contained volumes on maritime history, navigation, and what appeared to be local folklore. June had discovered a small cabinet beside the berth and was trying to work its latch. Dad, this one's stuck. Eli moved to help her, and as his fingers found the small brass catch, something clicked. Not just the latch, but something deeper, like a memory trying to surface. His father had taught him about boats when he was very young, before the distance and anger had grown between them. The cabinet opened to reveal a small collection of personal items, an old compass, some nautical instruments, and underneath it all, a photograph. Eli lifted the photo carefully. It was water-damaged around the edges, but still recognizable. Himself at perhaps 6 years old, sitting on the bow of this very boat, grinning widely, while his father's hand steadied him from behind. I remember that day, Mrs. Chen said softly. It was right after he bought the boat. He was so proud, so excited to share it with you. Eli stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the man in the picture with his memories of cold silences and long absences. What happened to him? What changed? Life, Mrs. Chen said simply. Life happened. June was exploring the rest of the cabin and had found another small compartment near the navigation station. "There's something in here," she announced, reaching into the small space. She pulled out what appeared to be a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth by handling. Eli took the journal from her, feeling its weight. The leather was soft with age, and the pages fell open naturally to entries written in his father's familiar handwriting. The first entry he could see clearly was dated just 2 years ago. The coordinates from the 1943 storm reports finally make sense. The current patterns have shifted over 70 years, but the landmarks remain. EM was right about the depth measurements. "Tomorrow, Barala try the southern approach." "EM," Eli murmured, running his finger over the initials. "Your grandfather," Mrs. Chen said. "Ezra Mason, 3 generations of Mason men working these waters." Eli flipped through more pages, finding entries about searches and coordinates. The deep cache and 30 years of looking. There were hand-drawn charts, tide calculations, and references to historical events he didn't understand. What was he looking for, he asked, more to himself than to anyone else. Murphy cleared his throat. "Your father never said directly, but there were stories. Old-timers talked about a ship that went down in the big storm of 1943. Not a fishing boat, something bigger. Government vessel, some said. Others claimed it was carrying cargo that folks would pay handsomely to recover." "Treasure?" June asked, her eyes lighting up with the possibility. "Maybe," Murphy said carefully. "Or maybe just an old man's obsession with something that couldn't be found." But as Eli continued reading, the entries seemed too detailed, too systematic for simple obsession. His father had approached whatever he was doing with the methodical patience of a professional researcher. Mrs. Chen was watching him with an expression that suggested she knew more than she was saying. "Your father left you this boat for a reason, Eli. Maybe it's time you tried to understand what that reason was." "Dad," June was looking at him with concern. "Are you okay?" He realized he'd been silent for several minutes, lost in the journal's pages. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just trying to understand something about Grandpa." "Can we keep the boat?" The question caught him off guard. Keep it? He'd come here planning to sell it for whatever scrap value it might have, hoping to pay down even a small portion of the debts that followed Sarah's medical bills. "But it's ours now, right? It belonged to Grandpa, and now it belongs to us." "Legally, yes," Eli said finally. "But keeping it means maintenance, storage fees, insurance." "It means having something that was his," June interrupted. "I never met him, but this was important to him. Maybe it could be important to us, too." Standing in that small cabin, holding his father's journal, and looking at his daughter's hopeful face, Eli felt something shift inside him. Not the crushing weight of financial desperation, but something lighter, possibility, maybe, or just the faintest suggestion that the story he'd been telling himself about his father might not be the whole truth. "Tell you what," he said, surprising himself. "Let's spend some time here today, look through his things, try to understand what he was working on. Then we'll decide." June's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Really?" Across the harbor, 3 men in expensive suits gathered near a black sedan. The tallest, silver-haired and carrying himself with authority, spoke quietly into a cell phone while watching the weathered dream. "Mr. Whitman," said one of his companions, "should we approach now?" Charles Whitman ended his call. "Not yet. Let's see what they find first." His cold eyes narrowed, calculating. Mason's been dead for 6 months, but his research is still very much alive. And now his son has returned, a son who might know more than he realizes. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of discovery. They found more journals, more charts, diving equipment that looked professional grade, and boxes of research materials that suggested his father had been in correspondence with maritime historians and treasure recovery specialists. Each discovery complicated the picture Eli had carried of his father as a selfish dreamer who'd abandoned his family for impossible pursuits. By afternoon, June had appointed herself the expedition's official archivist, carefully organizing papers and creating lists with the methodical enthusiasm of someone who'd found her calling. Mrs. Chen had appeared with sandwiches and cold drinks, settling herself on an overturned crate to supervise and offer commentary on each new revelation. "Your father was a proud man," she said as Eli showed her a letter from a university researcher expressing interest in his father's historical findings. Sometimes too proud to ask for help when he needed it, too proud to explain when he was misunderstood. He could have tried, Eli said, but there was less anger in it than there had been that morning. Yes, he could have, but pride is a funny thing. It can look like strength when it's really fear, or like independence when it's really protection. She studied him with those knowing eyes. You come by it honestly. As the sun began to set, painting Harbor's End in shades of gold and amber, Eli found himself reluctant to leave the boat. There was something about being surrounded by his father's careful work, his patient documentation of some grand search, that made the old man feel more real than he had in years. Dad, June said, settling beside him on the deck, where they had been watching the last light fade from the sky. I think Grandpa left us more than just a boat. What do you mean? I think he left us a mystery. And I think, she paused, choosing her words with the careful precision of someone who wanted to be taken seriously. I think maybe he wanted us to solve it. Eli looked at his daughter, this remarkable child who'd inherited her mother's wisdom and some indefinable quality that seemed uniquely her own. That's a pretty big mystery for a 10-year-old and her dad. Maybe, June said, but we're pretty good at figuring things out when we work together. As they packed up the journals and charts to take back to their hotel room, Eli felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Curiosity about tomorrow. Not just the grinding necessity of surviving another day, but genuine interest in what they might discover next. The weathered dream sat in the gathering darkness like a keeper of secrets. And for the first time since inheriting her, Eli began to think those secrets might be worth keeping. 3 days of reading his father's journals had left Eli with more questions than answers, but also with something he hadn't expected: a growing respect for the methodical intelligence behind the search. His father hadn't been chasing fantasies. He'd been conducting research with the patience of a scholar and the precision of a scientist. The morning sun filtered through the boat's cabin windows as Eli sat cross-legged on the small berth, surrounded by charts and notebooks. June was at the navigation table, carefully copying coordinates into a spiral notebook she'd designated as their treasure hunting journal. She'd thrown herself into the mystery with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found an adventure worthy of her attention. Dad, look at this, she said, holding up one of the charts. Grandpa marked the same area on 3 different maps, but the marks are slightly different each time. Eli looked over her shoulder. She was right. The coordinates his father had circled shifted slightly from map to map, as if he'd been refining his target over time. Good eye, sweetheart. What do you think that means? Maybe he was getting closer to something, like when you're looking for something you dropped and you keep narrowing down where it might be. Her innocent analogy struck closer to the truth than she probably realized. Eli had been reading about search patterns and grid systems, learning that treasure recovery was as much about systematic elimination as it was about lucky discovery. He was reaching for another journal when his fingers found something unexpected: a slight depression in the wood beneath the captain's chair. Pressing against it, he felt the wood give slightly, as if it wasn't quite solid. June, come look at this. She scrambled over, and together they examined the area more closely. What had seemed like a solid piece of decking revealed itself to be a carefully constructed panel, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. Is it a secret compartment? June whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make it disappear. Let's find out. Eli worked his fingers around the edges until he found a small catch hidden in the grain of the wood. With a soft click, the panel lifted away to reveal a space about the size of a shoebox. Inside was another journal, this one newer than the others, along with what appeared to be diving equipment, a waterproof case, depth gauge, and underwater camera. But it was the journal that drew Eli's attention. Unlike the others, this one was locked with a small brass clasp. June produced a paper clip from her pocket with the efficiency of someone who'd appointed herself the expedition's problem solver. I learned how to pick locks from a book Mrs. Patterson gave me. Mrs. Patterson taught you lock picking? She said it was important for girls to know how to get into places they weren't supposed to be. June worked the paperclip with surprising skill, her tongue poking out in concentration. After a few moments, the clasp clicked open. The first page was dated just 6 months before his father's death. and the handwriting was shakier than in the earlier journals, as if written by someone whose hands weren't quite steady. If someone is reading this, it means I'm gone and the secret dies with me unless I can find a way to pass it on. 37 years I've been searching for the Santa Isabella, and I finally found her. But finding her and recovering her cargo are two different things, and I'm running out of time. The storm of October 15th, 1943 sank her 3 miles northeast of Devil's Point in 68 feet of water. She wasn't just any cargo ship. She was carrying art and gold that the Nazis had stolen, being transported to safety by the underground resistance. 111 million worth by today's standards. June gasped. Dad, is that real? 111 million? Eli kept reading, his father's words painting a picture that was both thrilling and terrifying. I've located the wreck using side-scan sonar equipment I borrowed from the university. The cargo is still there, protected by the ship's hull and the cold Atlantic water. But I'm not the only one who knows about it. There are people, powerful people, who've been watching my research, waiting for me to find what they couldn't find themselves. The entries grew more urgent as Eli turned the pages. They approached me last month, offered to buy my research for a fraction of what the treasure is worth. When I refused, they made it clear that wasn't really a request. I've hidden copies of everything, including the exact coordinates, but I'm afraid they'll come after Eli if they think he knows something. Eli's hands were shaking now. His father's abandonment hadn't been abandonment at all. It had been protection. If my son is reading this, I need him to know I left not because I didn't love him, but because I loved him too much to let him get caught up in this. The treasure isn't just money. It's justice. Those art pieces belong to families the Nazis destroyed. The gold was stolen from people who were murdered for it. It needs to be returned to the rightful owners, not sold to the highest bidder. June was reading over his shoulder, her eyes wide. Grandpa was trying to do the right thing. It looks that way. Eli's throat felt tight. All those years of anger, of believing his father had chosen treasure over family, and the truth was exactly the opposite. I've made arrangements with Dr. Sarah Mackenzie at the Maritime Heritage Foundation. She knows about the wreck and has the resources to handle the recovery legally and ethically. If something happens to me, Eli should contact her. The coordinates are hidden in the boat itself, not in any journal or chart, but in the structure. Look for the compass rose carved into the helm housing. Eli looked up at the boat's small wheel, then at June. Without a word, they both moved to examine the helm more closely. Sure enough, etched so faintly into the brass housing that it was nearly invisible, was a compass rose with numbers worked into its design. Those are coordinates, June breathed. But their discovery was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the dock above, heavy boots moving with purpose rather than the casual pace of morning fishermen. Mr. Mason. The voice was polite but carried an undertone that made Eli's skin crawl. We'd like to have a word with you. Eli quickly closed the journal and slipped it into his jacket, motioning for June to stay quiet. They climbed up from the cabin to find 3 men standing on the dock. They wore expensive suits that looked out of place in Harbor's End, and their faces had the neutral expressions of people who were very good at not revealing what they were thinking. I'm Eli Mason. What can I do for you? The man in the middle, tall and thin, with silver hair, smiled without warmth. My name is Charles Whitman. I represent certain parties who had business dealings with your late father. My father didn't have business dealings. He was a fisherman. Oh, but he was so much more than that, wasn't he? Whitman's eyes moved to the boat, taking in details with the efficiency of someone cataloging assets. He was a researcher, a treasure hunter, you might say, and we believe he may have left certain information that belongs to our clients. I don't know what you're talking about. Whitman's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Mr. Mason, let's not play games. Your father spent decades researching the location of a certain vessel. Our clients invested significant resources in that research, and they're naturally interested in seeing some return on their investment. June moved closer to Eli, and he put a protective arm around her shoulders. My father left me a boat. That's all. A boat? Yes, but boats can hold many things, can't they? Charts, journals, coordinates. Whitman stepped closer. Our clients are prepared to be very generous for any information your father may have left behind. much more generous than the government would be should this become an official matter. The threat was politely wrapped but unmistakable. Eli felt anger rising in his chest, not just at these men, but at the situation his father had left him in. Even in death, the old man's secrets were putting his family in danger. "I need to think about this," Eli said carefully. "Of course, but don't think too long." Whitman reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "You have until tomorrow evening to decide. After that, our clients may feel compelled to explore other options." The three men walked away with the casual confidence of people who expected to get what they wanted. Eli watched them go, his mind racing. "Dad?" June's voice was small. "Are we in trouble?" Eli looked down at his daughter, this brave, brilliant child who'd already lost her mother and shouldn't have to be afraid of men in expensive suits. The anger crystallized into something harder. Determination. "No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. But I think it's time we learn the truth about what your grandfather was trying to do." That evening, back in their hotel room, Eli made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. He was going to finish what his father had started. Not for the money, though God knew they needed it, but for the justice his father had written about, and for the daughter who deserved to be proud of her family's legacy. He picked up his phone and dialed the number he had found in his father's contacts. "Dr. Mackenzie, this is Eli Mason. I think it's time we talked." Dr. Sarah Mackenzie arrived at Harbor's End the next morning like a breath of fresh ocean air. She was younger than Eli had expected, perhaps 35, with sun-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of confident bearing that came from years of diving in challenging waters. Her handshake was firm, her eyes direct, and when she looked at the weathered dream, Eli saw the same careful assessment his father might have made. "Your father was a remarkable man," she said without preamble. "Stubborn as hell, brilliant, and absolutely dedicated to doing the right thing. I'm sorry for your loss." They were standing on the dock beside the boat, early morning fog still clinging to the harbor. June sat on a nearby piling, openly studying Dr. Mackenzie with the intense curiosity she usually reserved for new books or particularly interesting puzzles. "He never mentioned you," Eli said, not unkindly but needing to establish the boundaries of his trust. "He wouldn't have. Your father was paranoid about security, especially after he realized he was being watched." Sarah's expression grew serious. "The men who visited you yesterday, they've been circling this project for years, waiting for someone else to do the dangerous work of actually finding the wreck." "So the Santa Isabella is real?" "Oh, it's real. And so is the cargo she was carrying." Sarah pulled a tablet from her backpack and showed them historical documents, shipping manifests, insurance records, correspondence between resistance fighters and Allied officials. October 1943, she was carrying recovered Nazi plunder being transported to safety, art pieces stolen from Jewish families, gold looted from occupied territories, cultural artifacts that represented centuries of heritage. June leaned forward to get a better look at the screen. "Is that a painting by Van Gogh?" "Very good eye. Yes, that's one of the pieces that was being transported, along with works by Monet, Degas, and several old masters. The total value today would be astronomical, but the historical significance is beyond price." Eli studied the manifest. His father's obsession suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't just about treasure hunting. Your father understood that this was about justice. Those art pieces belong to families, museums, cultural institutions. They need to be returned to their rightful owners, not sold to private collectors who will hide them away forever. Sarah closed the tablet and looked directly at Eli. "The question is, are you prepared to finish what he started? Because I have to warn you, it won't be easy. The people who approached you yesterday have resources and connections. They've been patient for decades. But now that the wreck has been located, they won't wait much longer." "How do you know it's been located?" "Because your father contacted me 3 weeks before he died. He'd found it, confirmed the cargo was intact, but he needed help with the legal framework for recovery. We were planning the operation when—" She paused, her expression growing darker. "When he had his accident?" Eli felt cold certainty settling in his stomach. Sarah's silence was answer enough. June had been following the conversation with growing alarm. "Someone hurt Grandpa because of the treasure." "We can't prove that," Sarah said carefully, But the timing was suspicious. Your father was scheduled to meet with federal authorities about the wreck. Someone may have decided he was becoming too much of a liability. Eli felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. His father had died protecting this secret, and now it was his burden to carry. But looking at June's determined expression, he realized it wasn't a burden he had to carry alone. What do we need to do? Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving. First, we need to verify the coordinates your father left. Then, we need to document everything thoroughly before anyone else gets involved, and we need to move fast. They spent the rest of the morning examining the compass rose carved into the helm housing. The numbers worked into the design were subtle, requiring careful measurement and calculation to decode. June proved surprisingly helpful with the mathematics, her natural aptitude for puzzles making her an ideal assistant for the painstaking work. Got it, Sarah announced finally, after cross-referencing the numbers with nautical charts. 2 miles northeast of Devil's Point at bearing 047 degrees. Depth should be around 68 feet. That matches what was in the journal, Eli confirmed. Then we have our target. Sarah looked at the boat with professional assessment. The Weather Dream isn't ideal for technical diving, but she'll work for initial reconnaissance. Your father had the right idea. A local boat? Stay low profile. Avoid attracting attention. I haven't been diving in years, Eli admitted. It comes back to you like riding a bicycle, but with more potential for drowning. Sarah's attempted humor didn't quite mask the seriousness of what they were contemplating. We'll start with shallow practice dives, get you comfortable with the equipment again. That afternoon, they moved the boat to Murphy's private slip, ostensibly for routine maintenance. Murphy asked no questions, but his knowing look suggested he understood more than he was saying. Chen appeared with a thermos of coffee and sandwiches, taking up her usual position as unofficial supervisor of the operation. Your father tried to teach you diving when you were young, she observed, watching as Sarah checked over the equipment they'd found in the boat's hidden compartments. He did. The memories were fuzzy but warm, patient instruction in shallow water. His father's hand steadying him as he learned to breathe through a regulator. I was maybe 8 or 9. He was proud of how quickly you learned. Used to say you had natural water sense, like it was in your blood. June looked up from the diving manual she'd been studying. Can I learn too? Absolutely not, Eli said immediately. But Dad, I'm a good swimmer. June, this isn't a swimming pool. We're talking about deep ocean diving, potentially dangerous conditions, and people who might not want us to succeed. His daughter's expression suggested this conversation was far from over, but she nodded with the grudging acceptance of someone who recognized a non-negotiable decision. Sarah emerged from the cabin, carrying what looked like a modified depth sounder. Your father was more prepared than I thought. This is professional-grade side-scan sonar equipment. With this, we can map the ocean floor and locate the wreck without guesswork. How long will that take? If the coordinates are accurate, a few hours. If we need to search a wider area, could be days. She paused, looking out at the harbor, where several boats moved through the afternoon light. But I'm more concerned about those friends of yours. They're not going to wait indefinitely. As if summoned by her words, Eli spotted a familiar figure on the far side of the harbor. Charles Whitman, standing beside a sleek powerboat that definitely didn't belong to any local fisherman. Even at a distance, the man's attention seemed focused on their activity. They're watching us, he told Sarah. She followed his gaze and swore softly. Then we need to be smarter than them. Tonight we take the boat out for what looks like a sunset cruise. Casual, nothing suspicious, but we'll actually be running a preliminary sonar sweep of the target area. What if they follow us? They probably will, but following and stopping us are two different things. As long as we're in open water, there's not much they can do except watch. The afternoon passed in preparation. Sarah walked Eli through the sonar equipment, refreshed his memory on diving protocols, and helped him plot their evening route. June made herself useful by organizing charts and taking detailed notes in her treasure hunting journal, approaching the task with the methodical enthusiasm of someone who'd found her calling. As the sun began to set, painting Harbor's End in shades of gold and crimson, they prepared to take the Weather Dream out for what might be the most important evening cruise of their lives. Dad, June said as they prepared to cast off, I know you're worried about those men, but I think Grandpa would be proud of what we're doing." Eli looked at his daughter, this remarkable child who'd inherited not just her mother's wisdom, but apparently her grandfather's sense of justice as well. "I think you're right, sweetheart." The engine turned over with a satisfying rumble, and the weathered dream pulled away from her slip, with the quiet dignity of a vessel finally returning to her proper element. Behind them, Harbor's End grew smaller in the gathering dusk. Ahead lay open water, hidden secrets, and the promise of answers that had been 37 years in the making. As they approached the coordinates, Sarah activated the sonar equipment. The screen flickered to life, showing the ocean floor 60 feet below. At first, it revealed nothing unusual, just the flat, featureless bottom they expected. But as they passed over the exact coordinates from the compass rose, the screen changed. A large, distinct shape appeared, unmistakably man-made. "There she is," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with professional awe. "The Santa Isabella." Eli stared at the screen, seeing not just the shape of a shipwreck, but the culmination of his father's life's work. The secret that had kept Robert Mason away from his family, the obsession that had ultimately cost him his life. It was real. June crowded closer, her eyes wide as she looked at the sonar image. "We found Grandpa's treasure." "No, sweetheart," Eli said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We found Grandpa's purpose." Sarah was already taking screenshots of the sonar readings, documenting the exact location. "This is incredible. The ship appears largely intact. After all these years, the hull structure is still clearly defined. That's extremely rare for a wreck this old." Behind them, just within visual range, a sleek powerboat maintained its distance, tracking their movements. Whitman's people, watching and waiting. "What now?" Eli asked. Sarah's expression was determined as she powered down the sonar. "Now we document everything properly and make sure those art pieces go back to their rightful owners. Your father wasn't just a treasure hunter, Eli. He was conducting proper archaeological research. And we're going to finish what he started." As they turned the boat back toward harbor, Sarah pulled Eli aside, away from June's curious ears. "There's something I didn't mention earlier, something your father discovered that changed everything." "What's that?" "The Santa Isabella wasn't just carrying stolen art. Based on your father's research, she was also transporting something called the Holocaust Ledger, a detailed Nazi accounting document listing every stolen item, its original owner, and its intended destination. It's not just treasure down there, Eli. It's evidence. Evidence that could help hundreds of families reclaim their stolen heritage." Eli felt the weight of this revelation settle over him. All those years he'd thought his father had abandoned him for gold and glory. The truth was far different. Robert Mason hadn't been hunting treasure. He'd been hunting justice. "Dr. Mackenzie," June called from the bow, "is it true that you're an underwater archaeologist? Do you work at a museum?" Sarah smiled, making her way forward to join June. "I'm the director of the Maritime Heritage Foundation. We specialize in locating and preserving historically significant shipwrecks. And please, call me Sarah." Watching them together, Eli was struck by how quickly June had connected with Sarah. His daughter had spent the past year building walls around her grief, becoming more serious, more adult than any child should have to be. But today, asking Sarah questions about shipwrecks and underwater exploration, she looked like a child again. Curious, excited, full of wonder. Later that night, as they docked the weathered Dream at Murphy's Slip, Eli noticed Whitman waiting at the end of the pier. Their eyes met across the distance, and the message was clear. Time was running out. "Tomorrow," Sarah said quietly, noticing the exchange. "We dive tomorrow." The dawn brought a heavy mist that shrouded Harbor's End in ghostly silence. Perfect cover for what they needed to do. Eli stood on the dock beside the weathered Dream, checking the diving equipment for the third time. Tanks, regulators, buoyancy compensators, depth gauges, all meticulously inspected. His father's training from decades ago returned in fragments, muscle memory awakening after years of dormancy. "Everything looks good," Sarah said, appearing beside him with a waterproof case containing underwater cameras and documentation equipment. "Murphy says we have about 3 hours before the weather turns. Should be enough time for a preliminary dive." "Where's June?" Eli asked. suddenly realizing his daughter wasn't on the dock. Mrs. Chen picked her up earlier. They're having a historical research breakfast at the diner. Your daughter negotiated quite forcefully to be included in this expedition, but I think Mrs. Chen convinced her that someone needs to compile all the information we already have. Eli smiled despite his nerves. June doesn't give up easily. She's her grandfather's granddaughter. Sarah paused, studying him with professional assessment. How are you feeling about the deep? It's been a long time, and this isn't exactly a resort reef. I'll manage. The truth was more complicated. Part of him was terrified, not just of the technical challenges of deep diving, but of what they might find. The Santa Isabella wasn't just a shipwreck. It was the reason his father had lived as he had, died as he had. The final piece of a puzzle Eli had been trying to solve his entire adult life. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. This isn't just about the dive for you, is it? No, it's about understanding. For 30 years, I thought I knew who my father was. A man who chose treasure hunting over his family. Now I'm not sure I knew him at all. From what I've seen of his research, Robert Mason was methodical, brilliant, and driven by something deeper than greed. That's rare in this field. Sarah loaded the last of the equipment onto the boat. Most treasure hunters are looking for a quick score. Your father was documenting a historical crime scene. They worked in comfortable silence after that, preparing the boat for departure. Murphy appeared briefly to hand them a thermos of coffee and a weather update, his weathered face betraying no hint of the danger they were undertaking. As the weather dream pulled away from the dock, the morning mist began to lift, revealing a glassy sea that seemed to promise safe passage. We need to be careful, Sarah said, checking the radar. Whitman's boat left the harbor an hour ago. They could be anywhere. Why haven't they just taken what they want? They clearly have more resources, more people. Sarah adjusted their course slightly, keeping the boat at a steady pace that wouldn't attract attention. Because they don't know exactly what they're looking for. The Santa Isabella's cargo was secret even in 1943. Official records listed her as carrying military supplies. The manifest your father found came from resistance archives, not public documents. So they need us to lead them to it. They need your father's research. The coordinates we found yesterday are just the starting point. The Santa Isabella broke apart during the sinking. The cargo could be scattered across half a mile of ocean floor. Eli absorbed this information, understanding dawning. That's why my father spent decades on this. He wasn't just looking for a shipwreck, he was mapping an underwater debris field. Exactly, and he encoded his findings in ways only someone who knew him would understand. Sarah glanced at him. He was protecting the information until the right people could use it. The journey to the dive site took 40 minutes, during which Eli saw no sign of Whitman's boat. Perhaps they'd managed to slip away unnoticed after all. As Sarah killed the engine and they prepared the diving equipment, the ocean around them remained empty and silent. Remember, this is just reconnaissance, Sarah said as they donned their wetsuits. We document what we find, but we don't disturb anything. Archaeological integrity is crucial if we want to establish legal claim to the artifacts. What about Whitman's claim? He said his clients invested in my father's research. Sarah's expression hardened. Meridian Recovery Corporation has a standard operating procedure. They provide minimal funding to researchers, then claim ownership of anything discovered. They're vultures, not archaeologists, and what they're after isn't historical preservation. It's profit. They completed their equipment checks in methodical silence. For Eli, each step was a strange combination of foreign and familiar, like revisiting a childhood home now occupied by strangers. As they prepared to enter the water, Sarah placed a hand on his arm. One more thing you should know. Your father wasn't working alone. He had help from the academic community, people who understood the historical significance of what he was doing. If Whitman's people give us trouble, we have allies they don't know about. Before Eli could ask what she meant, she slipped her regulator into her mouth and rolled backward off the boat into the Atlantic. After a momentary hesitation, he followed. The descent into darkness was both terrifying and exhilarating. As they dropped below the sunlit surface, the water around them shifted from bright blue to deepening shades of green. At 30 feet, Sarah signaled to check his equipment and pressure gauge, everything functioning normally. They continued downward, Following the guideline, they had attached to a small anchor. At 60 feet, the ocean floor materialized below them, a flat expanse of sand and scattered rocks. Sarah pointed to her underwater compass, then gestured in the direction they needed to search. Side by side, they began a careful grid pattern, maintaining visual contact while covering as much ground as possible. 10 minutes into the search, Eli spotted something unnatural protruding from the sand, a straight line where there should be only organic shapes. He signaled to Sarah, who immediately changed course to investigate. As they approached, the object revealed itself to be a metal rod, approximately 3 feet long, partially buried in the ocean floor. Sarah brushed away some of the sand, revealing corroded metal with faint markings. She took several photographs, carefully documenting the position and condition of the object. Then she pointed to something beyond it. Another metal fragment, then another. They were finding a debris trail. Following the scattered pieces, they soon encountered a larger section of the wreckage, a portion of hull plating lying flat against the sand. Sarah's excitement was visible even through her diving mask as she photographed the distinctive, riveting pattern that could help identify the vessel's manufacturer. But it was what they found next that confirmed they were in the right place. Half buried in the sand lay a small brass nameplate, its surface corroded by decades underwater, but still legible. SS Santa Isabella. Sarah carefully photographed the nameplate from multiple angles, then gave Eli a thumbs up. This was definitive proof. They had found his father's shipwreck. But where was the cargo? They continued along the debris field, discovering more fragments of the ship's structure, but nothing that resembled the valuable art pieces described in Robert's journals. After 40 minutes of methodical searching, their air supplies required them to return to the surface. "We found it," Sarah said as they removed their equipment aboard the weathered Dream. "Exactly where your father said it would be. The Santa Isabella's wreckage pattern suggests she broke apart on impact with the ocean floor. That means the cargo could be anywhere within a 100-yard radius of the main debris field." "We didn't see any sign of the artwork," Eli noted, toweling his hair dry. Not surprising. After 70 years underwater, most containers would have deteriorated. The paintings and smaller artifacts might be buried under sediment. We need more sophisticated equipment for the next dive. Metal detectors, airlift bags for careful excavation. "Will we have time?" Whitman's deadline is tonight. Sarah's expression was determined as she began storing their equipment. "Meridian doesn't dictate our timeline. But you're right about one thing: we need to move quickly. I have colleagues who can help. People with the right equipment and expertise. Can they be here soon?" "They can, but first we need to secure the site. Maritime salvage law is complicated. Whoever documents the wreck properly has the strongest legal claim." As they prepared to return to Harbor's End, Eli scanned the horizon, half expecting to see Whitman's boat. The ocean remained empty, which somehow felt more ominous than if they'd been obviously followed. "They're watching somehow," he said. "They have to be." "Probably." Sarah didn't seem particularly concerned. "But let them watch. Documentation is our best protection now." The return journey passed in contemplative silence. Eli found himself thinking about his father, alone on this same stretch of ocean, pursuing this same wreck for decades. The dedication required was staggering, not just physically, but emotionally, to sacrifice so much for something that might never be found. As they approached the harbor, Sarah finally broke the silence. "Your father was close to something big when he died. Not just finding the wreck, but connecting all the pieces, the art, the gold, the historical documentation. He believed the Santa Isabella wasn't just carrying random stolen items. She was carrying specific pieces selected because of their provenance and value." "What do you mean?" "The Nazi looting wasn't random. They targeted cultural treasures with specific historical significance. The cargo on the Santa Isabella represented some of the most important pieces taken from Jewish families across Europe." Sarah steered the boat carefully through the harbor entrance. "Your father believed finding these pieces wouldn't just return valuable art. It would help restore cultural heritage that the Nazis tried to erase." As they docked at Murphy's Slip, Eli saw June waiting on the pier, practically vibrating with excitement. Chen stood beside her, maintaining a calm dignity that contrasted with his daughter's barely contained energy. "Did you find it?" Was it there? Did you see the treasure? June called out before they had even secured the boat. We found the wreck, Eli confirmed, helping Sarah tie off the lines. No treasure yet, but we know we're in the right place. June's face fell slightly at the lack of immediate treasure, but her enthusiasm quickly rebounded. Mrs. Chen and I found something too, in Grandpa's journals, something about a second location. Eli and Sarah exchanged a quick glance. What second location? Sarah asked. Come on, I'll show you. June led them to Mrs. Chen's house, a Victorian structure that had stood watch over Harbor's End for more than a century. Inside, the dining room table had been transformed into a research station with journals, maps, and charts arranged in chronological order. June has quite the organizational mind, Mrs. Chen observed, setting a pot of tea on the table. She's cross-referenced all of Robert's journal entries by date, location, and subject matter. I made a timeline, June explained, pointing to a long sheet of paper taped to the wall. See, Grandpa started looking for the Santa Isabella in 1980. By 2010, he'd narrowed down the search area. Then in 2018, he started mentioning the secondary site and Plan B. Look at this entry. She pointed to a journal page dated just 8 months before Robert's death. Side scan confirms main wreck location, but cargo recovery too risky with current surveillance. Preparing secondary site at 42 degrees 17.73 N 69 degrees 38.N6 W. Shallower water, better visibility, secure from casual observation. Sarah's eyes widened as she read the entry. This is unexpected. Your father wasn't just looking for the wreck. He was preparing an alternative recovery location. But why? Eli asked. Why not just recover the cargo from the wreck site? Because he knew he was being watched, Mrs. Chen said quietly. In his last year, Robert became increasingly concerned about security. He believed people were following him, monitoring his communications. He started using this house as a meeting place because he thought his boat might be bugged. The coordinates for this secondary site, Sarah said, checking nautical charts, they're in much shallower water than the wreck, maybe 25 feet depth. That's unusual for a shipwreck from the 1940s. June looked up from another journal she'd been examining. That's because it's not a shipwreck. Listen to this. Completed third transfer to secondary site. Custom storage container holding securely. Environmental conditions optimal for preservation. Remaining pieces require professional equipment for recovery. The implications hit Eli like a physical blow. He already found it. He already recovered part of the cargo. Sarah sat down heavily, absorbing this revelation. This changes everything. Your father wasn't just researching the Santa Isabella. He was systematically recovering and relocating her cargo, creating an underwater storage facility that only he knew about. Why wouldn't he tell anyone? Eli asked. If he'd found valuable historical artifacts, why not go public? Mrs. Chen poured tea with the steady hand of someone who had weathered many storms. Because Robert understood something important about valuable things, Eli. The moment they become public, they become contested. Governments claim them. Companies sue for ownership. The very families who lost these treasures get pushed aside in the legal battles. He was waiting for the right moment, Sarah concluded, gathering evidence, documenting provenance, preparing for a recovery operation that would prioritize returning these pieces to their rightful owners. June, who had been flipping through more journal pages, suddenly held one up. Dad, look at this. Grandpa drew pictures of some of the things he found. This looks like a painting. The journal page contained detailed sketches of what appeared to be a landscape painting in an ornate frame, along with notes about its condition and preservation requirements. Next to the sketch was a name, Goldstein Family, Berlin, 1938. He was documenting the original owners, Sarah said, her voice filled with professional admiration. This level of detail, he wasn't just finding treasure, he was building cases for restitution. As they continued examining the journals, a clearer picture emerged of Robert Mason's true work. For decades, he had not only been searching for the Santa Isabella, but also meticulously documenting the provenance of her cargo, connecting each piece to the families from whom they had been stolen, and carefully recovering items when possible. We need to check this secondary site, Sarah said, making notes on her tablet. If your father already recovered part of the cargo and relocated it, Darrison, that explains why Meridian is so interested. They must have learned enough to know he found something valuable, but not enough to locate it themselves. Which means Whitman's deadline isn't just a pressure tactic, Eli realized. They're genuinely running out of time and patience. Exactly, and people who are desperate and well-funded can be dangerous. Sarah looked up from her tablet. I've contacted colleagues at the Maritime Heritage Foundation. They can be here by tomorrow with proper equipment and documentation specialists. Tomorrow might be too late, Mrs. Chen observed. Those men in suits don't strike me as the patient type. June, who had been unusually quiet for the past few minutes, suddenly spoke up. There's something else. Something Grandpa wrote about Meridian. She pulled out a journal entry from the final months of Robert's life. He says they're not just treasure hunters. They're brokers for private collectors who specialize in art with complicated provenance. A fancy way of saying stolen art, Sarah translated grimly. Meridian isn't just after the monetary value of these pieces. They're after the historical documentation that would prove Nazi theft. Without that documentation, these items can circulate on the black market indefinitely. The full weight of the situation settled over the room. This wasn't just about finding treasure or even honoring Robert's legacy. It was about preventing a second theft of items already stolen from victims of one of history's greatest atrocities. What do we do now? Eli asked, looking around the table at the unlikely alliance they had formed. A maritime archaeologist, an elderly Chinese-American widow, a 10-year-old girl, and himself a widower with mounting debts and fading dreams. We divide and conquer, Sarah decided. Mrs. Chen, can you continue organizing the documentation with June? Focus on anything related to the specific artifacts and their original owners. Mrs. Chen nodded, already reaching for another journal. We'll create files for each family mentioned in Robert's notes. Eli and I will check out this secondary site. If Robert did create an underwater storage facility, we need to document it properly before Meridian figures out what we're doing. Sarah began gathering her equipment. We should leave within the hour. The weather window is closing, and we need to take advantage of the daylight. As they prepared for the second expedition, Eli found himself in the small bedroom of their hotel suite, changing into dry clothes. June appeared in the doorway, her expression uncharacteristically serious. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Are you doing this for the money or because it's the right thing to do? The question caught him off guard with its directness. He sat down on the edge of the bed, motioning for June to join him. I'm doing it for a lot of reasons. We do need the money, your mom's medical bills, your future education. I won't pretend that's not part of it. He paused, searching for the right words. But after seeing what your grandfather was really working on, after understanding why he did what he did, I think I'm mostly doing it because it's the right thing. These paintings and artifacts, they belong to families who lost everything in the Holocaust. They deserve to get back what's theirs. June considered this, then nodded. Mom would think that's a good reason. She would, wouldn't she? Eli smiled, feeling a familiar ache at the mention of Sarah. His wife had possessed an unwavering moral compass, something their daughter had clearly inherited. I think Grandpa would be proud of you, June added. Mrs. Chen says he always believed you'd understand someday. The thought of his father having faith in him, despite their estrangement, created a complicated knot of emotions in Eli's chest. Regret for the years lost, gratitude for this unexpected connection across time, determination to honor what Robert had begun. I hope so, he said simply. Now you stay with Mrs. Chen and keep working on those journals. No adventures while I'm gone, okay? June rolled her eyes with the exaggerated patience of a child dealing with an overprotective parent. I'm just going to read old books and make lists, not exactly dangerous. With you, even reading can become an adventure. He hugged her tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair, strawberry shampoo and the faint saltiness that seemed to permeate everything in Harbor's End. An hour later, the weather dream was again cutting through the waves, heading toward the coordinates of the secondary site. The afternoon sun had broken through the morning clouds, creating a deceptively peaceful scene. Sarah kept one eye on the radar, watching for any sign of Whitman's boat. This location is closer to shore, she noted as they approached the coordinates. Smart of your father, easier access, better visibility, and less likely to attract attention from passing vessels. How would he have moved artifacts from the wreck to this site? Eli asked. Some of those paintings must be large, not to mention the gold. Gradually over time, small loads, quiet operations, probably at night. Sarah adjusted their course slightly. Your father had the perfect cover, a local fisherman who spent his life on these waters. No one would question him being out at odd hours. As they reached the coordinates, Sarah cut the engine, allowing the boat to drift gently above the site. The water here was noticeably clearer than at the wreck location, with visibility extending at least 30 feet down. I can almost see the bottom from here, Eli remarked, leaning over the side. Perfect conditions for what your father was doing. Let's get in the water and see what he created. They donned their diving gear with practiced efficiency, having already completed one successful dive earlier that day. As they prepared to enter the water, Sarah handed Eli an underwater camera. Document everything exactly as we find it. Position, condition, any identifying marks. If these artifacts are going to be returned to their rightful owners, we need to establish an unbroken chain of custody. The descent was easier this time, the shallow depth reducing both physical and psychological pressure. At 25 feet, the ocean floor came into clear view, a sandy expanse dotted with rock formations. At first, Eli saw nothing unusual, just the natural underwater landscape. Then Sarah pointed to what appeared to be a small outcropping of rock about 30 yards away. As they swam closer, Eli realized it wasn't a natural formation at all. It was a carefully constructed structure, camouflaged to blend with the surrounding environment. Robert Mason had built an underwater vault. The structure was ingenious in its simplicity, a reinforced concrete shell anchored to the ocean floor, covered with local stone and deliberately colonized with marine growth to disguise its man-made origin. A small entrance on one side was secured with a padlock that, despite years underwater, appeared to be in good condition. Sarah examined the lock, then pointed to the numbers on its face. The same number sequence that had been hidden in the compass rose on the weathered Dream. Eli turned the dials to the correct combination, and with a slight resistance, the lock opened. The door swung inward, revealing a space about the size of a small garden shed, lined with metal shelving and filled with waterproof containers of various sizes. Each container was labeled with a code system that matched entries in Robert's journals. This wasn't just storage. It was a cataloged archive. Sarah motioned for Eli to begin photographing while she examined the first container. Inside, protected by specialized preservation materials, was a small landscape painting in an ornate gold frame. Even through the waterproof covering, the brushwork was unmistakably that of a master artist. Sarah carefully photographed the painting from multiple angles, then returned it exactly as she'd found it. Container after container revealed more treasures. Painting, small sculptures, ritual objects from synagogues, even documents preserved in special vacuum-sealed cases. Each item had been meticulously protected against the underwater environment, labeled with its provenance information, and arranged in a system that only Robert Mason would fully understand. But it was the final section of shelving that contained the most surprising discovery. Here, in heavily reinforced containers, were stacks of gold bars, each stamped with Nazi markings. Alongside them were smaller boxes containing what appeared to be gold coins, jewelry, and other precious items. Sarah's eyes widened behind her mask as she photographed these containers. She pointed to Eli's air gauge. They had been underwater for nearly 30 minutes and needed to begin their ascent. With reluctance, they secured the underwater vault and began the journey back to the surface, their minds racing with the implications of what they had discovered. "It's incredible," Sarah said as they climbed back aboard the weathered Dream. "Your father created a complete underwater repository." The preservation methods he used, they're professional grade. Some of those techniques weren't even standard practice until the last decade. He was consulting with conservation experts. "How much do you think is down there?" Eli asked, still processing the scope of their discovery. "Based on what we saw, millions. The art alone, that small Van Gogh landscape, would fetch at least $8 million at auction. The gold adds another dimension entirely." Sarah began downloading the photos from their cameras to her tablet. But the real value isn't monetary. It's historical. Your father preserved not just the artifacts, but their historical context. Who owned them, where they came from, how they were stolen. The Holocaust ledger you mentioned, did you see it? Not yet, but it has to be there. Your father referenced it too many times in his journals for it to be hypothetical. Sarah's expression grew more serious. Eli, we need to contact federal authorities. This isn't just about art recovery anymore. Those Nazi gold bars are evidence of war crimes. There are international protocols for handling such discoveries. What about Whitman's deadline? He expects an answer tonight. We stall him. Make him think we're still considering his offer while we secure federal protection for the site. Sarah checked her watch. I have contacts at the Holocaust Art Recovery Program. They can expedite the process, bring in the proper authorities within 24 hours. And until then, we protect what your father found. We don't let Whitman or Meridian anywhere near that site. As they headed back toward Harbor's End, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. The beauty of the scene stood in stark contrast to the weight of what they had discovered, a hidden archive of stolen history, preserved by one man's dedication and waiting to be returned to a world that had thought it lost forever. But as they approached the harbor entrance, Eli spotted something that shattered the peaceful moment. Whitman's sleek boat was docked at the main pier, and beside it were two more vessels that hadn't been there that morning. Men in dark clothing moved with purpose between the boats, loading what appeared to be diving equipment. They're preparing their own expedition, Sarah said grimly. They must have figured out we've found something. How? We've been careful. Harbor's End is a small town. People talk. Or maybe they've been watching more closely than we realized. She adjusted their course, steering toward Murphy's private slip rather than the main dock. We need to get back to Mrs. Chen's house, compare what we found with Robert's journals. There might be information we're missing, something that could help us protect the site. As they docked at Murphy's slip, the old man himself appeared, his weathered face set in lines of concern. You've got visitors, he said without preamble. Suit and tie types asking questions all over town. They were at the inn looking for your room, and they stopped by my shop asking about the boat. Did they find June? Eli asked, suddenly alarmed. Mrs. Chen took her to her sister's place outside town. Said to tell you they're continuing the research there, away from prying eyes. Relief washed over Eli, followed quickly by renewed determination. Thanks, Murphy. We need to grab our equipment and get out of sight ourselves. Take my truck, Murphy offered, tossing Eli a set of keys. It's behind the shop, less conspicuous than walking through town right now. They transferred their essential equipment to Murphy's ancient pickup truck and took the back road to Mrs. Chen's sister's house, a small farmstead about 3 miles outside Harbor's End. As they pulled up the gravel driveway, Eli saw June watching from the window, her face lighting up at their arrival. Dad, did you find Grandpa's secret place? Was the treasure there? She called out as they entered the house. We found it, Eli confirmed, hugging her tightly. Your grandfather built something amazing, an underwater vault filled with artwork and historical artifacts. Mrs. Chen's sister, Alice, was a younger version of Elena, perhaps in her 60s rather than 70s, with the same sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. You look like you could use some food, she observed, already moving toward the kitchen. Sit, I'll make sandwiches while you talk. Around the kitchen table, they shared their discoveries. Eli and Sarah describing the underwater vault and its contents, June and Mrs. Chen explaining what they'd learned from further study of Robert's journals. We found entries about specific families, June explained, showing them a notebook filled with her careful handwriting. Grandpa was tracking down the descendants of the original owners. Look, he found the Goldstein family in New York. Sarah Goldstein is 86 years old now. She was just a child when her family fled Berlin and their art collection was seized. Sarah examined June's notes with growing excitement. This is exactly what we need, documentation connecting the artifacts to their original owners. With this level of detail, we can make a strong case for restitution rather than standard salvage claims. There's something else, Mrs. Chen said, pulling out a journal they hadn't seen before. This was hidden in Robert's fishing equipment at my house. I found it this afternoon while looking for his old tackle box. The journal was newer than the others, dated just weeks before Robert's death. The handwriting was shakier, more urgent. Eli began reading aloud. Meridian has increased surveillance. I suspect they've placed tracking devices on the boat. Their latest offer was more threat than negotiation. $2 million for all my research, with the clear implication that refusal would have consequences. They don't understand what this is about. This isn't about money, it's about justice. He turned the page and continued. I've prepared contingency plans. The main coordinates are hidden where only Eli would think to look. The secondary site contains 60% of the recovered artifacts, securely preserved. Dr. Thornton at Woods Hole has authentication documentation and historical provenance records. If something happens to me, these connections must be maintained. Dr. Margaret Thornton, Sarah breathed. She's the director of maritime archaeological research at Woods Hole, one of the world's leading experts on artifact preservation and authentication. Your father was working with top researchers, Mrs. Chen noted. Not what one would expect from a small-town fisherman. He wasn't just a fisherman, Eli said, the realization settling over him like a physical weight. He was conducting a professional archaeological recovery operation with proper academic oversight and documentation. The next entry in the journal sent a chill through the room. Whitman made it clear today that Meridian's patience is exhausted. He mentioned Eli and my granddaughter by name, a warning I cannot ignore. I've accelerated the timetable, meeting with federal authorities next week to transfer all research materials and coordinate recovery of remaining artifacts. After that, Meridian will have no leverage. The meeting that never happened, Sarah said quietly, because 3 days after writing this, your father died in what was ruled an accident. It wasn't an accident, Eli said, certainty hardening his voice. They killed him because he was about to expose them, about to transfer everything to federal authorities. And now they're after us, June said, her voice small but steady, because we found what Grandpa found. The kitchen fell silent as they absorbed the implications. Robert Mason hadn't just been researching a historical shipwreck. He had uncovered evidence that powerful people wanted to remain hidden, and he had paid for that discovery with his life. Now his son, granddaughter, and their allies face the same threat. We need to move faster than we planned, Sarah decided, pulling out her phone. I'm contacting Dr. Thornton right now. If she has authentication documents, that strengthens our position enormously. And we need federal protection for both the wreck site and the secondary location. As Sarah stepped outside to make her calls, Eli studied the final pages of his father's journal. One entry in particular caught his attention. The compass rose contains more than just coordinates. The secondary pattern, visible only under specific conditions, leads to the tertiary site, insurance against discovery. The most valuable items, the ledger and the provenance documentation, must be preserved at all costs. There's a third site? June asked, reading over his shoulder. Apparently, and according to this, it contains the most important historical documentation. Eli looked up at Mrs. Chen. Did my father ever mention a tertiary site to you? Not directly, but in his final months he spent a lot of time diving in Blackfish Cove. It's a protected inlet about 5 miles north of here. Very sheltered, minimal current, natural cave formations underwater. Local kids used to use it for swimming lessons because the water is so calm. That sounds like the perfect place to hide the most sensitive materials, Eli noted. We should check it as soon as possible. Sarah returned, her expression both concerned and determined. Dr. Thornton is flying in tomorrow morning. She's bringing federal authorities with her, people from the Holocaust Art Recovery Program and the State Department's Cultural Heritage Division. But we have a more immediate problem. Whitman? Eli guessed. Yes, my sources in town say Meridian has assembled a full recovery team. Professional divers, sonar equipment, everything they need to locate and strip both the wreck and the secondary site. They're planning to move tonight under cover of darkness. Can they find the sites without our help? The wreck site, possibly. It's where they'd expect to look, and they have sophisticated equipment. The secondary site would be harder, but not impossible if they've been tracking your movements. Sarah sat down heavily. We have to assume they know more than we'd like. So what do we do? June asked. We can't let them steal Grandpa's treasure. It belongs to the families. The young. Eli looked at his daughter, then at Sarah and the Chen sisters. In just a few days, they had become an unlikely team, united by Robert Mason's legacy and the pursuit of justice he had begun decades ago. The path forward was dangerous, but the alternative, allowing Meridian to seize and exploit artifacts stolen from Holocaust victims, was unthinkable. We make our own plan, Eli decided. Tonight, before they can move, we secure the evidence that matters most, the historical documentation from the tertiary site. With that, even if they find the artifacts, they can't hide their provenance. That means another dive, Sarah noted, in unfamiliar territory after dark. I know. Eli met her eyes, seeing in them the same determination he felt. But my father spent 37 years protecting this history. We can risk one night. As the sun began to set over Harbor's End, casting long shadows across the water, they prepared for what might be the most dangerous dive of their lives. Unbeknownst to them, a revelation waited beneath the waves that would change everything they thought they knew about the Santa Isabella and the true nature of her cargo. Blackfish Cove lay shrouded in darkness as Murphy's truck rumbled down the narrow access road, headlights cutting through the night. The old fisherman had insisted on driving them, arguing that his presence would seem less suspicious than the strangers if anyone was watching. Just a couple of old-timers going night fishing, he'd said, helping load the diving equipment into the truck bed. The cove itself was a small, sheltered inlet, hidden from the main harbor by a curved peninsula of rocky land. True to Mrs. Chen's description, the water here was unnaturally calm, protected from ocean currents by the natural geography. My father taught me to swim here, Eli said as they unloaded the equipment. The memory surfaced unexpectedly. Warm summer days, his father's strong hands supporting him in the water, patient instructions about breathing and floating. It was before the distance grew between them, before treasure hunting consumed Robert Mason's life. Or at least, what Eli had always believed was treasure hunting. It's perfect for what we need, Sarah observed, surveying the cove with professional assessment. Limited access points, natural protection from currents, and those underwater cave formations would provide ideal hiding places. They worked efficiently in the darkness, setting up portable lights around their improvised dive station. Murphy stationed himself as lookout at the road entrance, armed with a marine radio to warn them of any approach. The night was overcast, the moon occasionally breaking through clouds to cast silver reflections on the water's surface. According to your father's journal, the tertiary site contains the most historically significant documentation, Sarah said as they prepared their equipment. The Holocaust ledger and provenance materials that connect the artifacts to their original owners. Why separate them from the artifacts themselves, Eli asked, checking his regulator for the third time. Insurance. If someone found the artwork, they might still not be able to prove ownership without the documentation. Your father was creating layers of security. Sarah's admiration was evident in her voice. Most treasure hunters focus solely on the valuables. Robert understood that the historical context was equally important. As they donned their wetsuits, Eli felt a strange mixture of emotions: anticipation, fear, and something deeper, almost like communion with his father. For the first time, he was truly following in Robert Mason's footsteps, not just physically, but spiritually, understanding the mission that had consumed the older man's life. The cave formations should be about 30 feet down along the eastern wall of the cove, Sarah said, checking their underwater lights. Based on local geography, they likely form a series of interconnected chambers. Your father would have chosen one that was easily accessible but not immediately obvious to casual divers. How will we know which one? Sarah smiled faintly. The compass rose. Your father used that symbol repeatedly in his work. Look for it, or something similar, marking the correct location. The water was shockingly cold as they slipped beneath the surface, colder than their earlier dives despite the sheltered location. Eli felt the familiar disorientation of night diving, the darkness pressing in from all sides, visibility limited to the narrow cone of light from their underwater torches. They descended slowly, maintaining contact as they approached the eastern wall of the cove. The rock face emerged from the darkness like a spectral presence, covered in marine growth and carved by centuries of water into fantastic shapes. As their lights played across the surface, Eli could see the openings of several small caves, some barely large enough to admit a diver, others forming more substantial entrances. Sarah pointed to a particular formation about 20 yards ahead, a cave entrance partially obscured by a natural outcropping of rock. As they approached, Eli's light caught something that didn't belong in this underwater landscape. A small metal plate affixed to the rock beside the cave entrance. Drawing closer, he saw it wasn't just any metal plate. It was a compass rose, identical to the one on the Weathered Dream's helm. They exchanged a look of triumph through their masks. This was it, Robert Mason's tertiary site. Sarah gestured for Eli to follow as she entered the cave, her light probing the darkness ahead. The passage was narrow at first, requiring them to proceed single file. After about 15 feet, it widened into a small chamber, roughly the size of the Weathered Dream's cabin. Unlike natural cave formations, this space showed signs of human modification. The floor had been cleared of debris and leveled, and metal anchors had been embedded in the walls. Secured to these anchors was a large, cylindrical container made of what appeared to be specialized marine-grade materials. It resembled a torpedo in shape, but was clearly designed for storage rather than weaponry. A small control panel on one end glowed with a faint blue light, some kind of battery-powered preservation system, still functioning after months underwater. Sarah examined the container carefully, photographing it from multiple angles before turning her attention to the access mechanism. The control panel featured a familiar pattern, a numeric keypad arranged around a central compass rose. The code would be the same one they'd used at the secondary site, the one hidden in the helm housing. With careful movements, Sarah entered the code. The panel flashed green, and with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, the container's end cap unlocked. Together, they carefully removed the cap, revealing the contents. Inside, protected by layers of preservation materials, was a collection of document cases, each sealed in specialized archival packaging. Sarah removed the first case and opened it within its protective covering. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its cover embossed with an eagle and swastika, unmistakably a Nazi administrative document. They continued examining the container's contents, finding more documents, microfilm reels, and several small notebooks that appeared to be Robert Mason's original research journals, predating all the ones they'd found on the boat. Each item had been meticulously preserved against the underwater environment, protected by technology that seemed almost too advanced for a small-town fisherman to access. After documenting everything, they carefully resealed the container, ensuring the preservation system was functioning properly. Their air supplies were running low, signaling time to return to the surface. As they exited the cave, Eli's light caught something he hadn't noticed on entry, a small plaque affixed to the opposite wall of the cave entrance. Moving closer, he saw it contained just 3 words: for Eli's eyes. His father had left him a message, hoping, that someday his son would follow this path and find what he had hidden. The realization was overwhelming, even underwater. Sarah touched his arm, pointing to their air gauges and then upward. The message would have to wait. They surfaced to find Murphy still at his post, but his expression had changed from calm vigilance to concerned urgency. "We've got company coming," he said as they climbed out of the water. 2 vehicles turned onto the access road about 5 minutes ago, moving slow like they don't want to be heard. "Meridian," Sarah said grimly, already stripping off her diving gear. "They must have been tracking us after all." "There's a hiking trail that leads back to town through the woods," Murphy said, pointing to a barely visible path leading away from the cove. "It's rough going in the dark, but it'll keep you off the road." "What about the equipment?" Eli asked, looking at their diving gear. "Leave it. I'll tell them I was night fishing and saw some kids diving, came down to run them off." Old man's story, but believable enough. You need to get those photos somewhere safe. Sarah was already transferring the images from her underwater camera to a small waterproof hard drive. These need to reach Dr. Thornton. They prove the existence and condition of the historical documentation. "Go," Murphy urged, hearing the approaching vehicles. "I'll stall them as long as I can." Yet with no time to fully dry off, they grabbed only the most essential items: the camera, hard drive, and a small bag containing their phones and wallets. The rest they hurriedly concealed among the rocks, hoping Murphy's story would be convincing enough to prevent a thorough search. The forest path was treacherous in the darkness, roots and rocks threatening to trip them with every step. They moved as quickly as they dared, guided only by the dim light of Sarah's phone. Behind them, they heard vehicles arriving at the cove, doors slamming, voices calling out. "Murphy will be okay, right?" Eli asked as they pushed through the underbrush. "He's a local fixture with no obvious connection to your father's research. They have no reason to harm him." Sarah sounded more confident than she felt. "Our priority has to be securing this evidence. Without it, everything your father worked for could be lost." They hiked for nearly an hour, the path eventually widening as it approached the outskirts of Harbor's End. Rather than entering town directly, they circled around to approach Mrs. Chen's sister's house from the rear property line, avoiding main roads where Whitman's people might be watching. June was still awake when they arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Chen and her sister, the table covered in journals and notes. Her face lit up when they entered, then quickly shifted to concern when she saw their disheveled state. "What happened? Did you find it? Are you being chased?" The questions tumbled out in rapid succession. "We found the tertiary site," Eli confirmed, accepting the towels Alice Chen offered. "A hidden underwater vault in a cave at Blackfish Cove. It contained historical documentation, Nazi records, provenance materials, everything needed to connect the artifacts to their original owners. And yes, we were followed," Sarah added, connecting her hard drive to her laptop. "Meridian tracked us somehow. Murphy stayed behind to stall them." "Did you bring the documents?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Too risky to move them. They're in a specialized preservation container underwater. We documented everything with photographs." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, backing up the images to secure cloud storage. "I'm sending these to Dr. Thornton now, along with GPS coordinates of all 3 sites. Even if Meridian finds the physical locations, they can't erase the digital evidence." June moved to Eli's side, examining the scrapes on his arm where he'd brushed against rocks during their hasty exit from the cove. "You're hurt." "Just scratches, sweetheart. Nothing serious." He pulled her into a one-armed hug, grateful for her concern and for the fact that she was safe, away from Whitman and his operatives. Chen brought first aid supplies and coffee, her efficiency a calming presence in the midst of their tension. As she cleaned the scrapes on Eli's arm, she asked, "What was in these documents that makes them so important?" Sarah looked up from her laptop. "Based on what we saw, they're administrative records from Nazi art confiscation programs, detailed inventories of what was taken, from whom, and where it was sent. Essentially, they're proof of the systematic looting of cultural heritage during the Holocaust." "Why would those be on the Santa Isabella?" Alice Chen asked, pouring coffee for everyone. "That's what I've been trying to figure out," June said, pulling a notebook toward her. "Grandpa wrote that the Santa Isabella wasn't just carrying random stolen art. She was carrying specific pieces selected for their historical and cultural significance. And she was being escorted by resistance fighters, not just transporting cargo." Sarah nodded, impressed by June's insight. "The ship was part of an organized effort to rescue cultural treasures from Nazi control. These weren't just valuable items. They were pieces of Jewish cultural heritage that the Nazis were specifically targeting for destruction. The art was evidence," Eli realized. "Evidence of cultural genocide." "Exactly, and the documentation we found tonight proves it." Sarah finished her uploads and closed the laptop. "With these records, we can establish not just ownership of individual pieces, but also document the broader crime against humanity that these thefts represented." "No wonder Meridian wants to find it first," Mrs. Chen observed. "Such documentation would make it impossible for them to sell these items on the private market." "It's more than that," Sarah said, her expression growing more serious. "Based on what we found, I believe there may be evidence linking American interests to Nazi art theft. Your father's journals mentioned finding correspondence between Nazi officials and someone identified only as American Contact 7. The kitchen fell silent as they absorbed this implication. The Santa Isabella wasn't just carrying stolen art. She was carrying evidence of potential collaboration between American officials and Nazi art theft programs. Evidence that someone might still want suppressed, even after 70 years. "This isn't just about recovering valuable artifacts anymore," Eli said slowly. "This is about exposing historical truths that powerful people want to keep hidden." which makes what we're doing even more dangerous, Sarah agreed, but also more important. June had been studying the photographs on Sarah's laptop with the focused attention of someone much older than her 10 years. Dad, look at this, she said suddenly, pointing to an image of one of the ledger pages. That name there, Blackwood. Isn't that the name of the cove where you just were? Eli and Sarah leaned closer to examine the image. Sure enough, on a list of American contacts was the name Lieutenant Harrison Blackwood, U.S. Naval Intelligence. Blackfish Cove, not Blackwood, Eli corrected automatically, then paused as the connection registered. Wait, could they be related? The cove named after a person? Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. Harbor's End was a naval intelligence outpost during World War II. Many of the local features were named after military officers stationed here. I never made the connection before, but yes, Blackfish Cove was originally Blackwood Cove. The name corrupted over time in local usage. Sarah was already searching online. Lieutenant Harrison Blackwood, promoted to captain after the war, then admiral, retired in 1965 as a highly decorated naval officer. She continued scrolling through search results. His son, Richard Blackwood, served in naval intelligence during Vietnam, then transitioned to the State Department. Currently serves as Deputy Director of Maritime Assets Recovery at the Department of Commerce. The implications landed like a physical weight. A government official with direct oversight of maritime salvage operations, Eli said, who happens to be the son of someone potentially linked to Nazi art theft. That would explain Meridian's confidence, Sarah said grimly. They're not just a private corporation. They have connections within the federal bureaucracy that regulates their industry. Could this Blackwood person have had something to do with my father's death? Eli asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Sarah didn't answer immediately, her expression troubled. I can't prove it, but the timing is suspicious. Your father was preparing to meet with federal authorities when he died. If Blackwood learned about that meeting, he could have arranged to prevent it, Eli finished. June had been unusually quiet during this exchange, processing the adult conversation with the serious concentration that had become her hallmark since her mother's death. Now she spoke up, her voice small but steady. Dad, are these bad people going to try to hurt us too? The question cut through Eli like a knife. In pursuing his father's legacy, he had potentially placed his daughter in danger, the very thing Robert Mason had tried to prevent by distancing himself from his family. No one is going to hurt you, he promised, with more conviction than he felt. We're going to make sure of that. Dr. Thornton arrives tomorrow morning, Sarah reminded them. She's bringing federal authorities, people from outside Blackwood's sphere of influence. Once we transfer the evidence to them, we'll have official protection. But until then, we're vulnerable, Mrs. Chen observed. And Meridian now knows you've found something at Blackfish Cove. A plan began to form in Eli's mind, risky but potentially effective. What if we let them think they've won? Let them find the tertiary site, even recover the documentation container. What good would that do? Sarah asked, confused by the suggestion. The real evidence isn't in the physical documents anymore. It's in your digital copies, already backed up and transmitted to Dr. Thornton. If Meridian thinks they've secured all the evidence, they might let their guard down. A diversion, Sarah realized, warming to the idea. While they're focused on the tertiary site, we secure the secondary site where the actual artifacts are stored. Exactly, the documentation is crucial, but it's the physical artifacts that Meridian ultimately wants, the art and gold they can sell on the black market. As they refined the plan, a new complication emerged. Murphy called, his voice tense even through the crackling connection of the marine radio Alice kept for emergencies. They didn't buy my fishing story, he reported. They're searching the cove thoroughly. Brought in underwater lights, the works, and they're asking around town about your whereabouts. Checked the hotel, the boat slip, even came by my shop again. Are you okay? Eli asked, concerned for the old fisherman who had risked himself for them. And I'm fine, played dumb, told them I thought you might have gone to Portland to meet with maritime lawyers. Seemed to buy that, at least temporarily. Murphy paused, then added, but there's something else. Whitman was talking to someone on the phone, sounded important. Kept referring to the deputy director and saying they needed to accelerate the timetable. Blackwood, Sarah said grimly after Murphy signed off. They're calling in their government connection, which means we have less time than we thought, Eli concluded. Dr. Thornton doesn't arrive until tomorrow morning. Meridian could move on the secondary site tonight once they finish at Blackfish Cove. We need to get there first, Sarah decided. Secure the artifacts or at least document their condition and location thoroughly enough to establish our prior claim. How? They're watching the harbor, the boat, probably the roads too. Not all the roads, Alice Chen spoke up from where she'd been quietly listening. There's an old service road that runs along the backside of the peninsula. It comes out near the secondary site coordinates. Locals use it for beach access, but tourists don't know about it. We'd still need diving equipment, Sarah pointed out. Ours is at Blackfish Cove. I might be able to help with that, Alice said. My late husband was a diving instructor. His equipment is still in the garage. Hasn't been used in years, but it should be functional with some basic checks. A plan was quickly formulated. Eli and Sarah would use Alice's car and her husband's diving equipment to access the secondary site via the back road. Mrs. Chen would stay with June at the house, continuing to organize and analyze Robert's journals for any additional information that might help. Murphy would maintain his position in town, feeding false information to Meridian to buy them time. As they prepared to leave, Eli took a moment alone with June, kneeling to meet her at eye level. I need you to stay here with Mrs. Chen and help her with the research. Can you do that for me? June nodded solemnly. I know, Dad. I'll be careful. Then with a directness that sometimes startled him, she added, You be careful too. Mom's already gone and I don't want to lose you too. The simple statement hit him with unexpected force. In the whirlwind of discoveries and danger, he had been focused on Robert's legacy, on the historical significance of what they'd found. June's words reminded him of what was truly at stake. Not just justice for Holocaust victims, but his relationship with his daughter, her security and future. I'll be careful, he promised. This will all be over soon, and then we can decide what comes next. Together. June hugged him fiercely, then pulled back with determination in her eyes. I'll keep working on Grandpa's journals. There might be something else important we haven't found yet. An hour later, Eli and Sarah were bumping down the overgrown service road in Alice's ancient Volvo, the trunk loaded with diving equipment that smelled of dust and disuse. The night had deepened, clouds obscuring the moon and stars, providing additional cover for their clandestine operation. Your daughter is remarkable, Sarah said as they navigated the rutted track. Most children her age wouldn't understand the significance of what we're doing. June's had to grow up fast, Eli replied, a familiar ache in his voice. After her mother died, she became my rock as much as I was hers. Sometimes I worry she's taking on too much trying to be the strong one. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, and having a purpose, being part of something important, that can be healing. The observation struck close to home. Wasn't that what Eli himself was experiencing? After months of grief and directionless struggle, his father's legacy had given him purpose, a mission beyond mere survival. Perhaps June was finding the same comfort in their shared quest. The service road ended at a small, secluded stretch of beach about half a mile from the coordinates of the secondary site. They unloaded the diving equipment and began the laborious process of checking everything: tanks, regulators, buoyancy compensators, all while keeping an eye on the water for any sign of Meridian's boats. The equipment's old but serviceable, Sarah concluded after thorough inspection. We'll need to be conservative with air consumption, but it should get us to the site and back. As they prepared to enter the water, Sarah paused, looking at Eli with an expression he couldn't quite read. Before we do this, there's something you should know. Something your father told me when we first started working together. What's that? He said that if anything happened to him, I should tell you he was sorry. Not for the work he did, but for the way he did it. For shutting you out. For making you think he didn't care. She hesitated, then added, he said the hardest part of his life was pretending you weren't the most important part of it. The words landed like a physical blow, cracking open something that had been sealed inside Eli for decades. The anger, the abandonment. The years of believing his father had chosen treasure over family. All of it suddenly reframed by this simple message. Why didn't you tell me this before? He asked, his voice rougher than he intended. I needed to be sure you were ready to hear it, that you'd seen enough of his work to understand why he made the choices he did. Sarah checked her diving watch, the gesture almost apologetic. We should go. The tide is optimal right now, and we don't know how long till Meridian finishes it at Blackfish Cove. They entered the water in silence, each processing the emotional weight of the moment in their own way. The night dive was challenging, with limited visibility and the unfamiliar equipment requiring extra attention. They navigated primarily by compass, Sarah leading with the confidence of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. As they approached the coordinates of the secondary site, the underwater landscape began to look familiar. The same sandy bottom, the same scattered rock formations they had seen earlier that day, but something was different. As their light swept across the area where the underwater vault should be, they found only disturbed sand and broken stone. The structure was gone. Sarah signaled frantically, pointing to fresh marks in the ocean floor, evidence of heavy objects being dragged, of deliberate and recent disturbance. They expanded their search pattern, swimming in widening circles around the coordinates. But the conclusion was inescapable. Someone had already been here. The underwater vault containing the recovered artifacts had been removed. They surfaced with the shared shock of this discovery, treading water as they removed their regulators. Meridian beat us to it, Eli said, the reality sinking in like a stone. They found the secondary site while we were at Blackfish Cove. That's not possible, Sarah countered, her professional assessment cutting through his assumption. Those drag marks are fresh, within the last hour, and Meridian's team has been at Blackfish Cove that entire time. Murphy would have told us if they'd left. Then who? I don't know, but whoever it was knew exactly what they were looking for and had the equipment to remove an entire underwater structure. That's not amateur work. They returned to shore in somber silence, the implications multiplying with each passing minute. Not only had they lost the physical artifacts, but the mystery of who had taken them added a new layer of danger to their situation. Was there a third party involved? Or had Meridian somehow split their forces without their knowledge? As they loaded the equipment back into Alice's car, Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Her expression transformed from concern to alarm as she read it. It's from Dr. Thornton. Her flight's been delayed by mechanical issues. She won't arrive until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. Sarah looked up, her professional composure momentarily cracked. And there's more. She says Richard Blackwood has issued an official Department of Commerce directive freezing on all maritime recovery operations in this area pending a federal review. Can he do that? Legally, yes. His position gives him that authority. It's a stalling tactic meant to prevent any official recovery until Meridian can secure everything. But they already have. The secondary site is empty. Sarah shook her head, her determination visibly rebuilding. They have the artifacts, but not the documentation that proves their provenance. Not the evidence linking Blackwood's father to Nazi art theft. That's still in our hands, digitally at least. As they drove back toward Alice Chen's house, the pieces began to rearrange themselves in Eli's mind. Robert Mason had spent 37 years not just searching for a shipwreck, but meticulously documenting a historical crime and its modern cover-up. He had encoded his findings, hidden them in multiple locations, and created a trail that only his son could follow, all while keeping his family at a distance to protect them from exactly the danger they now faced. The anger Eli had carried for decades transformed into something else. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. His father had been fighting a battle larger than Eli had ever imagined, against opponents more powerful than he had known existed. They arrived back at Alice's house to find an unexpected scene. June was still at the kitchen table, but now surrounded by dozens of printed photographs arranged in a complex pattern. Mrs. Chen was on the phone, speaking urgently in Chinese. "Dad," June looked up as they entered. "I found something in Grandpa's journals, something about the Van Gogh painting." "What about it?" Eli asked, momentarily set back by this shift in focus. "Grandpa wrote that it was special, not just valuable, but significant in a different way." June pointed to journal passages she had highlighted. "He kept calling it the key and the validator. I didn't understand what that meant until I started looking at the photographs from the other journals." She indicated the pattern she had created on the table. "See, in every documentation photo Grandpa took of the recovered artifacts, The Van Gogh painting appears somewhere in the frame. It's like he was deliberately including it in every image. Sarah moved closer, studying the arrangement with growing excitement. She's right. The painting is being used as a reference point, a constant element to validate the authenticity of the photographs. But why that specific painting? Eli asked. Because of this. June handed him a magnifying glass and pointed to a specific area of one photograph. Look at the back of the canvas, where the frame meets the painting. Through the magnifier, Eli could make out what appeared to be handwritten text along the edge of the frame, partially visible where the canvas had separated slightly from the wood. It's a documentation number, Sarah realized, looking over his shoulder. A reference to the Nazi inventory system. That painting isn't just valuable art. It's directly linked to the administrative records we found at the tertiary site. Which means, Eli prompted, seeing the professional excitement building in her expression, which means even if Meridian has the physical artifacts, they can't hide their provenance. That painting contains physical evidence connecting it to the Nazi documentation we've already digitally secured. Sarah's smile was fierce with triumph. Your father created a failsafe. Even if the sites were discovered and the items removed, the evidence trail would remain intact. As they processed this revelation, Mrs. Chen ended her phone call, her expression grave. That was my nephew who works at the harbor. Whitman's people are loading equipment onto their boats. Diving gear, recovery apparatus, heavy lifting equipment. They're preparing for a major operation. They're going after the wreck itself, Sarah concluded. Now that they have the artifacts from the secondary site, they want to recover anything that might remain at the primary location. But that doesn't make sense, Eli objected. If they already have the artifacts my father recovered, why risk a deep water operation for whatever might remain? The answer came to him even as he asked the question. Because there's something else. Something my father found but didn't move to the secondary site. The gold, Sarah confirmed. Your father's journals mentioned that some pieces were too heavy or bulky for him to move alone. The Nazi gold bullion would have been the most difficult to relocate. So Meridian's going after the original wreck site to recover the gold, Eli summarized. And with Blackwood's directive in place, they can do it without official oversight or interference. Not if we get there first, Sarah countered. Blackwood's directive hasn't been formally implemented yet. It won't take effect until published in the Federal Register tomorrow. Until then, we still have legal standing to document the wreck. How? They have the harbor watched. The weather dream is probably under surveillance. We don't need the weather dream. Sarah was already checking equipment lists on her tablet. I have colleagues in Portland with a research vessel. They could be here by dawn if I call now. We document the wreck site thoroughly, establish prior claim, and create enough evidence that Blackwood can't simply make it disappear. The plan was audacious but sound. If they could document the wreck site with proper archaeological protocols before Meridian began their recovery operation, they would establish a legal claim that even Blackwood's directive couldn't easily override. As Sarah stepped outside to make her calls, Eli found himself drawn to the window, looking out at the night sky where stars had finally begun to emerge from behind thinning clouds. Somewhere out there on the dark water, his father's legacy was being threatened. Not just the treasure he had found, but the justice he had sought for families robbed by history's greatest crime. June joined him at the window, her small hand finding his. We're going to stop them, right, Dad? We're going to try, sweetheart. Your grandfather spent his life protecting this history. We can't give up now. Mom would be proud of us, she said with the simple certainty of childhood. And I think Grandpa would too. The observation brought an unexpected lump to Eli's throat. Here, in the midst of danger and discovery, his daughter had found a connection to both her lost mother and the grandfather she had never known. Whatever happened next, that alone made their journey worthwhile. Sarah returned, her expression a mix of determination and concern. My colleagues are on their way, but there's a complication. Coast Guard radio chatter mentions unusual activity in our target area. Meridian might be moving earlier than we anticipated. How much earlier? They could be at the wreck site already, preparing for a pre-dawn operation. She checked her watch. We have maybe 6 hours before sunrise. If they're working with underwater lights, they could recover significant material before official maritime traffic resumes in the morning. The stakes were suddenly higher, the timeline compressed. If Meridian recovered the gold and remaining artifacts before they could document the site, a crucial piece of historical evidence would disappear into private collections, the truth of its origins concealed forever. What do we do? Eli asked, the weight of responsibility settling over him. Sarah's answer was immediate and resolute. We go now. My colleagues will meet us directly at the coordinates. We document everything we can, establish our presence, and make it impossible for Meridian to operate without witnesses. As they prepared for this final confrontation, Eli realized they had reached the culmination of his father's 37-year quest. Whatever happened in the coming hours would determine whether Robert Mason's life work resulted in justice or became another layer of historical concealment. The night ocean awaited, holding both danger and truth beneath its dark surface. Like his father before him, Eli would have to dive into those depths to find what mattered most. Dawn was still hours away as they made their final preparations. Sarah's colleagues from the Maritime Heritage Foundation had responded with remarkable speed, redirecting their research vessel, the Oceanographer, from its position near Portland. They would rendezvous directly at the coordinates of the Santa Isabella wreck. June stays here, Eli said firmly, looking at his daughter's disappointed expression. This is too dangerous. For once, June didn't argue. The gravity of the situation had penetrated even her extraordinary curiosity. I know, Dad. Mrs. Chen and I will keep working on the journals. There might still be information that could help you. Mrs. Chen nodded in agreement. My sister's house is secure and few people in town even know it exists. June will be safe here. Alice Chen had provided them with her late husband's truck, a rugged vehicle better suited to the coastal back roads than her Volvo. As they loaded the last of their equipment, Murphy arrived, his weathered face etched with concern. Whitman's people are on the move, he reported. 2 boats left the harbor about an hour ago, heading northeast. They're not being subtle anymore. Northeast is the direction of the wreck site, Sarah confirmed. They're making their play for the gold. There's something else. Murphy's voice dropped lower. There's a Coast Guard cutter shadowing them but not intervening. Unusual behavior unless they have some kind of official sanction. Blackwood, Eli surmised, using his government connections to provide cover for Meridian's operation. Sarah checked her watch. Our window is closing. The oceanographer should be approaching the coordinates now. We need to move. Eli knelt to embrace June one last time. Stay safe, sweetheart. This will all be over soon. Find Grandpa's gold, Dad, she replied with unexpected fierceness. Don't let the bad guys win. The drive to the coastal rendezvous point took 30 minutes, following winding back roads to avoid potential surveillance in Harbor's End. They parked at an isolated stretch of shoreline where the oceanographer's launch would meet them. The night remained overcast, the air heavy with the promise of approaching weather. Storm front moving in, Murphy observed, scanning the horizon with experienced eyes. Going to make diving conditions challenging. It might work to our advantage, Sarah responded. Meridian's people are treasure hunters, not professional marine archaeologists. Adverse conditions will slow them down more than us. A light flashed 3 times from the darkness offshore, the signal from the oceanographer's launch. Sarah responded with her own flashlight, confirming their position. Minutes later, the sleek form of a rigid inflatable boat emerged from the gloom, approaching the shore with quiet efficiency. 2 figures waited in the boat, a young woman with short-cropped hair and the focused expression of a professional scientist, and an older man whose weathered face suggested decades at sea. Dr. Mackenzie, the woman greeted Sarah with evident relief. We've been monitoring radio traffic. Meridian has established a perimeter around the wreck site. They're preparing for a major recovery operation. Any sign of government vessels? Sarah asked as they loaded their equipment into the launch. Coast Guard cutter maintaining distance but definitely present, not responding to standard maritime hails. Just as we feared, Sarah murmured to Eli, unofficial official support. The launch cut through the dark water with minimal noise, its advanced electric motor barely disturbing the surface. As they approached the oceanographer, Eli saw it was smaller than he had expected, perhaps 60 feet long, but equipped with sophisticated research technology visible even from a distance. Don't let her size fool you, Sarah said, noting his expression. The oceanographer is one of the most advanced marine research vessels in the Northeast. Side-scan sonar, ROV capabilities, multi-beam echo sounder, everything we need to document the wreck site thoroughly. They boarded quickly, greeted by a small but professional crew. The captain, a woman in her 50s with the steady confidence of someone who had navigated many difficult situations, immediately ushered them to the bridge. "We've got a situation developing," she said without preamble, indicating the radar display. Two vessels maintaining position approximately half a mile apart, centered on what we believe is the wreck site. They've deployed underwater lights and diving platforms. Recovery operation appears to be in progress. "And the Coast Guard?" Sarah asked. "Maintaining position here." The captain pointed to another blip on the radar. "Close enough to monitor but not interfere. They've issued a maritime safety alert, warning vessels away from the area due to underwater salvage operations." "They're providing cover," Eli realized, making it look like an official operation. "How close can we get without being detected?" Sarah asked. "We're running dark now, minimal electronic signature. We can approach to within 500 yards before they're likely to spot us visually." The captain traced a course on the navigation system. "I recommend we position ourselves here, between their vessels and the Coast Guard cutter. Forces them to acknowledge our presence." "Do it," Sarah decided, "and prepare the ROV for immediate deployment. We need to document the wreck site and any recovery activities already in progress." As the oceanographer changed course, Eli joined Sarah at the equipment preparation area. The remote-operated vehicle, essentially an underwater drone equipped with high-definition cameras and sampling tools, was being readied for deployment. "Once we're in position, we'll launch this immediately," Sarah explained. "It can reach the wreck site faster than divers and begin documentation before Meridian realizes what we're doing. And then we establish our presence as legitimate marine archaeologists conducting authorized research. They can't simply order us away without revealing they have no actual jurisdiction." Sarah's expression was determined. "And if they're already recovering artifacts, we'll have documented evidence of unpermitted salvage operations." The oceanographer's engines hummed softly as they approached the target area. On the horizon, the faint glow of powerful underwater lights revealed Meridian's position. They were running a major operation using industrial equipment to recover whatever remained in the sunken hull of the Santa Isabella. 500 yards, the captain announced. "Decision time. Do we announce our presence or continue silent approach?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Announce us. Full research vessel protocol. We're conducting legitimate maritime archaeological research in international waters." The captain nodded and activated the ship's communication system. "Attention vessels in grid sector 47 Alpha. This is the research vessel oceanographer conducting maritime archaeological survey operations. We are approaching to deploy research equipment. Please acknowledge." For several tense moments, there was no response. Then a clipped professional voice replied, "Oceanographer, this is the vessel Meridian Explorer. This area is currently under restricted access for authorized salvage operations. Please maintain your distance." "Meridian Explorer, we have no record of exclusive salvage rights granted for this location. Please clarify your authorization." Another pause, longer this time. When the response came, the voice had changed, older, more authoritative. "Oceanographer, this is Charles Whitman, Operations Director for Meridian Recovery Corporation. We are conducting authorized salvage operations under federal oversight. The Coast Guard has established a safety perimeter. Please respect it." Sarah took the radio. "Mr. Whitman, this is Dr. Sarah Mackenzie, Maritime Heritage Foundation. We have documented evidence that the vessel you are salvaging is the SS Santa Isabella, carrying historically significant artifacts illegally seized during the Holocaust. Any recovery operations require proper archaeological protocols and documentation of provenance." The silence that followed spoke volumes. Whitman clearly hadn't expected such specific knowledge of what they were recovering. "Dr. Mackenzie," he finally responded, his tone markedly less confident, "this is a private corporate operation with appropriate permissions. Your presence here is unwelcome and potentially disruptive to sensitive recovery procedures." "We're deploying our ROV to document the site," Sarah announced, signaling the crew to proceed. "As professional marine archaeologists, we have both the right and the obligation to ensure proper archaeological standards are maintained at historically significant sites." As the crew lowered the ROV into the water, the radar showed movement, one of Meridian's vessels changing position, moving to intercept them. "They're trying to block our approach," the captain observed. "Hold position," Sarah instructed. Continue ROV deployment. They can't legally prevent us from conducting research in these waters. The underwater drone slipped beneath the surface, its powerful lights illuminating the dark water as it descended toward the wreck site. On the control room monitors, they watched the live feed as it approached the ocean floor. What they saw confirmed their worst fears. Meridian had established a full-scale industrial recovery operation. Powerful underwater lights illuminated the wreck site, where divers in professional gear were systematically removing items from what remained of the Santa Isabella's hull. A large recovery platform suspended from one of their vessels was already laden with items brought up from the wreck, including what appeared to be metal containers. The gold, Eli breathed, recognizing the distinctive shape of the Nazi bullion containers from his father's photographs. They're stripping the site, Sarah said, her professional outrage evident. No documentation, no archaeological protocols, just extraction. They're destroying the historical context. The ROV continued its approach, capturing high-definition video of Meridian's operation. On another vessel, they could see what appeared to be an impromptu processing station, where recovered items were being quickly cleaned, documented, and stored in specialized transport containers. "This is perfect," Sarah said grimly. "We're recording direct evidence of unauthorized salvage of historically significant artifacts. Not even Blackwood can make this disappear." But as the ROV drew closer to the main recovery area, one of Meridian's divers noticed it. After a brief communication with his team, two divers broke off from their work and began swimming toward the drone. "They've spotted the ROV," the operator warned, taking evasive action. The underwater drone changed course, attempting to maintain its documentary mission while avoiding interception. For several tense minutes, it seemed to be working, until one of the divers produced what looked like a specialized underwater tool. "They're going to disable it," Sarah realized. "Get as much footage as you can before—" The screen flickered, then went dark as the diver used the tool to sever the ROV's communication tether. "Connection lost," the operator confirmed. "ROV is disabled." But they had what they needed: clear video evidence of Meridian's operation, including recovery of items that matched Robert Mason's documentation of the Santa Isabella's cargo. "Vessel approaching from the southeast," the captain announced suddenly. "Not Meridian and not Coast Guard. Different configuration." They watched as the new vessel appeared on radar, approaching directly from the direction of Harbor's End. It was moving fast, on an intercept course with both Meridian's operation and the oceanographer. "Can you identify?" Sarah asked. The captain adjusted their sensors, focusing on the approaching boat. "Appears to be a private vessel, approximately 35 feet. Wait." She looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "It's registering as the Weathered Dream." "That's impossible," Eli said. "The Weathered Dream is docked at Harbor's End." "Not anymore," the captain replied, pointing to the radar signature. "Someone's brought her out, and they're heading straight for the wreck site." A new voice crackled over the radio, young, determined, and heart-stoppingly familiar to Eli. "Meridian vessels, this is June Mason aboard the Weathered Dream. You're recovering artifacts that belonged to my grandfather, Robert Mason. He spent 37 years documenting that wreck, and you have no right to what's in it." "June," Eli grabbed the radio. "June, what are you doing? How did you—" "Dad, Mrs. Chen and I figured it out. There's something else in the wreck, something Grandpa wrote about in his last journal. Something called the Director's Log. It proves everything." Before Eli could respond, Whitman's voice cut in, cold and threatening. "Young lady, you are interfering with a legally sanctioned operation. Return to Harbor immediately or face serious consequences." "I'm not going anywhere," June's voice replied, with stubborn determination that mirrored her grandfather's. "This is our family's legacy, and I'm not letting you steal it." Eli felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. Somehow June had taken the Weathered Dream, his father's boat, their family's only real asset, and piloted it directly into a confrontation with people who had already demonstrated they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. "Captain, change course to intercept the Weathered Dream," he said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Now." "Already adjusting," she confirmed, hands moving across the navigation controls. "ETA 3 minutes. "June, listen to me," Eli continued over the radio. "Stay away from Meridian's vessels. We're coming to you. Do not approach them. Do you understand?" But Dad, the journal, Mrs. Chen found it hidden in the boat's engine compartment. It has everything, all the evidence about who was really behind the Santa Isabella. The radio suddenly went silent. June's transmission cut off mid-sentence. June, June, Eli called, panic rising in his voice. The radar showed Meridian's vessels changing position, both now moving toward the Weather Dream's location. They're intercepting her, Sarah said, her own concern evident. We need to reach her first. The oceanographer's engines surged as the captain pushed them to maximum speed, cutting through the dark water toward the Weather Dream's position. On deck, crew members prepared for potential emergency operations, bringing out additional lights and rescue equipment. 2 minutes to intercept, the captain announced. We'll reach her just before Meridian does. As they closed the distance, the Weather Dream became visible in the darkness, its running lights illuminating the familiar weathered hull. At the helm, barely visible in the pre-dawn gloom, stood the small figure of June, her determined face illuminated by the boat's instrument panel. June, Eli called through a megaphone as they drew alongside. Cut your engines. We're coming to get you. June looked up, relief washing over her face as she recognized her father. But before she could respond, a spotlight from one of Meridian's approaching vessels illuminated the Weather Dream completely, harsh white light freezing the scene in stark detail. Mason, Whitman's amplified voice carried across the water. Control your daughter or we will be forced to take action. She's a child, Eli shouted back. Back off and let us handle this. The oceanographer maneuvered between Meridian's vessel and the Weather Dream, creating a protective barrier. Crew members prepared to board the smaller boat and retrieve June. But as they approached, a series of events unfolded with catastrophic speed. June, perhaps panicking at the approach of multiple vessels, attempted to change course. The Weather Dream, never designed for such rapid maneuvers, lurched dramatically. June lost her balance, falling hard against the helm. The boat veered sharply, directly into the path of Meridian's approaching vessel. Despite evasive action, the larger boat couldn't change course quickly enough. There was a sickening crunch of metal against wood as the vessels collided. June! Eli's scream tore through the night as he watched the Weather Dream list heavily to one side, taking on water from a devastating gash in her hull. Without hesitation, he dove from the oceanographer's deck, swimming with desperate strokes toward his father's sinking boat. Behind him, Sarah was shouting orders, coordinating the emergency response. But Eli heard nothing except the pounding of his own heart. The Weather Dream was sinking rapidly, her aged wood no match for the violence of the collision. As Eli reached her, the deck was already awash, the cabin partially submerged. June, he called, climbing aboard the tilting vessel. June, where are you? A small sound from the cabin drew his attention. Swimming inside, he found June trapped against the far wall, a fallen cabinet pinning her legs. The water was rising rapidly around her. Dad, she gasped, her voice tight with pain and fear. I'm sorry, I thought I could help. Don't talk, Eli commanded, fighting his way through the rising water to reach her. Just hold on. The cabinet was heavy, waterlogged wood making it even more difficult to move. Eli strained against it, muscles burning with the effort, but it barely shifted. Dad, June's voice was smaller now, frightened in a way he hadn't heard since her mother died. The water's getting higher. It was already at her chest and rising inexorably as the Weather Dream continued its descent toward the ocean floor. In moments, it would reach her chin, then cover her face entirely. With a roar of desperate effort, Eli braced himself against the cabin wall and pushed against the cabinet with every ounce of strength he possessed. This time it moved, just enough for June to pull her legs free. Go, he urged, helping her toward the cabin entrance. Swim up and don't stop. They emerged from the cabin just as the Weather Dream gave a final, shuddering lurch and slipped beneath the surface. Eli kept one arm around June, kicking powerfully toward the surface, fighting the boat's downward pull. They broke through into the cold pre-dawn air, gasping and choking. Lights converged on their position as the oceanographer's rescue team located them. Within minutes, they were being pulled aboard the research vessel, emergency blankets wrapped around their shivering forms. The journal, June coughed, still trying to explain even as medical personnel checked her for injuries. Grandpa's last journal was in the engine compartment. It had everything, names, dates, the American officials who helped transport the Nazi gold, someone called the director. Shh, Eli soothed, holding her close, overwhelmed with relief that she was alive. It doesn't matter now. You're safe. That's all that matters. But Sarah, who had been listening intently, shook her head. It does matter. The director would be the final piece of evidence linking American officials to Nazi art theft. If that journal went down with the weathered dream, it's not lost, came a new voice from the deck entrance. They turned to see Mrs. Chen, wrapped in a heavy coat, supporting herself on a cane but radiating the same quiet strength she had always possessed. Mrs. Chen? Eli blinked in confusion. How did you? I came with June, she explained. Did you think I would let a 10-year-old pilot a boat alone? I was below deck when the collision happened. From inside her coat, she withdrew a waterproof document case. And I brought this, the original journal, not just a copy. Robert gave it to me for safekeeping years ago, made me promise to reveal it only when the time was right. Sarah took the case with reverent care, opening it to reveal a leather-bound journal similar to the others they had found, but notably newer. The first page bore a simple dedication. For Eli, when he's ready to know the truth. The truth about what? Eli asked, still cradling June against him. Before Mrs. Chen could answer, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Dr. Mackenzie to the bridge immediately. We have a situation developing. Sarah hurried to the bridge, followed by Eli once he had assured himself that June was safe with the medical personnel. The scene that greeted them was one of controlled chaos. Multiple vessels approaching, the captain reported. Coast Guard has changed position and is now moving toward Meridian's operation, and we're picking up radio traffic, a lot of it, on federal channels. On the radar display, they could see new vessels converging on their position from multiple directions. The Coast Guard cutter had abandoned its passive observation and was now actively approaching Meridian's recovery operation. What changed? Sarah wondered aloud. The answer came in the form of a helicopter appearing on the horizon, its searchlights sweeping across the water as it approached. As it drew nearer, they could make out the distinctive markings of federal law enforcement. The radio crackled with a new, authoritative voice. Attention all vessels in this area. This is Special Agent Morrison, Federal Bureau of Investigation. This area is now under federal jurisdiction as part of an active investigation. All recovery operations are to cease immediately. Remain in position and prepare to be boarded. Whitman's voice responded, the earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. This operation has Department of Commerce authorization. Contact Deputy Director Blackwood immediately. Deputy Director Blackwood is currently being questioned by federal authorities, came the calm reply. His authorization has been suspended pending investigation into conspiracy and obstruction of justice. I repeat, all recovery operations are to cease immediately. Sarah and Eli exchanged looks of stunned disbelief as the implications sank in. Somehow, in the span of hours, the entire situation had been reversed. What had been a clandestine corporate operation with unofficial government support was now the target of a federal investigation. What happened? Eli asked. How did the FBI get involved so quickly? Dr. Thornton, Sarah realized. The evidence we sent her, she must have taken it directly to federal authorities outside Blackwood's influence. The helicopter circled lower, its downdraft creating ripples across the water's surface. As dawn finally began to break on the horizon, illuminating the scene in pale golden light, they could see Meridian's personnel scrambling to secure their vessels. Their recovery operation abruptly terminated. The FBI helicopter landed on the larger of Meridian's vessels. Agents in tactical gear emerged, securing the ship and its personnel with practiced efficiency. On the radar, additional Coast Guard vessels were approaching, establishing a perimeter around the entire area. They're securing the site, Sarah observed with a professional satisfaction, preserving the archaeological integrity of what remains. A smaller boat launched from the Coast Guard cutter, heading directly for the oceanographer. As it approached, they could see it carried several people in official uniforms, along with one civilian, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the commanding presence of someone accustomed to authority. Dr. Thornton, Sarah breathed. She made it after all. As the boat came alongside, Sarah hurried to help her colleague aboard. The two women embraced briefly before Dr. Margaret Thornton turned to survey the scene with sharp, assessing eyes. We got here as quickly as we could, she said. Your evidence was compelling, but it was the additional material from Woods Hole that broke the case open. The authentication documents I had been keeping for Robert Mason provided the final links we needed. Authentication documents? Eli asked. Your father didn't just document the wreck and its cargo, Dr. Thornton explained. He meticulously authenticated each piece, establishing provenance and connecting them to their original owners. He created an unbroken chain of evidence from the Nazi confiscation to the present day. And the director's log? Sarah asked. June mentioned something about that before the collision. The most damning evidence of all, Dr. Thornton confirmed. It's a record kept by the director of a special OSS unit during World War II, a unit tasked with recovering stolen art, but which actually diverted certain high-value items for personal profit. The log names names, including Harrison Blackwood, as a key facilitator. And his son continued the cover-up, Eli realized, using his position at the Department of Commerce to protect anyone who might try to recover the Santa Isabella. Precisely. When Richard Blackwood learned your father had found the wreck and documented its cargo, he activated old contingency plans, using Meridian as private contractors to recover the evidence before it could become public. And my father? Eli asked, the question that had haunted him for months finally finding voice. His death wasn't an accident, was it? Dr. Thornton's expression softened with genuine regret. No, the FBI has preliminary evidence suggesting it was arranged to look like an accident. Blackwood couldn't risk Robert going public with what he had found. The weight of this confirmation settled over Eli like a physical burden. His father had been murdered for coming too close to a truth that powerful people wanted hidden. The distance Robert had maintained from his family hadn't been neglect or obsession. It had been protection. A commotion on Meridian's vessel drew their attention. FBI agents were escorting Charles Whitman off the ship in handcuffs, his earlier arrogance replaced by the stunned expression of someone whose world had collapsed around him. What happens now? Eli asked, watching as federal authorities systematically secured the site and its recovered artifacts. Now we do what your father always intended, Dr. Thornton said with quiet determination. We document everything properly, establish clear provenance, and begin the process of returning these artifacts to their rightful owners or their descendants. The Santa Isabella's cargo doesn't belong in private collections or government vaults. It belongs with the families from whom it was stolen. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the water in shades of gold and blue, Eli felt a complex emotion he couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't exactly closure. The wounds left by his father's absence and death were too deep for simple healing. It wasn't exactly vindication, though Robert Mason's life work had been proven more significant than anyone had realized. It was something else, a sense of continuation, of taking up a legacy that spanned generations. His grandfather had witnessed the sinking of the Santa Isabella. His father had dedicated his life to finding it and documenting its significance. Now Eli and June would see that work completed, the circle finally closed. June appeared on deck, wrapped in a blanket but otherwise unharmed, her eyes widening as she took in the scene of federal authorities taking control of Meridian's operation. Did we win, Dad? She asked, coming to stand beside him. Eli put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. Your grandfather won, sweetheart. He just needed a little help from us to finish the job. As the morning light strengthened, revealing the full extent of the federal operation now underway, the weathered Dream lay at the bottom of the ocean, her wooden hull finally at rest after decades of service to 3 generations of the Mason family. But her purpose had been fulfilled. The truth she had helped protect would finally come to light, and the treasures she had helped recover would return to their rightful places in the world. The weathered Dream had become reality at last. 6 months later, Harbor's End looked different in the golden light of early autumn. The fishing boats still bobbed in their slips. The morning fog still rolled in from the Atlantic to wrap the town in its gray embrace, but something fundamental had changed. Perhaps it was the new sign at the harbor entrance. Robert Mason Memorial Harbor, home of the Santa Isabella Recovery Project. Eli stood at the end of the main pier, watching as June carefully arranged a display of photographs on an easel. Today marked the official opening of the Harbor's End Maritime Museum's new exhibition, Justice Reclaimed, the Santa Isabella, and the Recovery of Holocaust Art. June had appointed herself unofficial curator assistant, approaching the task with the same methodical enthusiasm she'd shown during their investigation 6 months earlier. "Is this one straight, Dad?" she called, adjusting a black and white photograph of Robert Mason from his younger days, standing proudly on the deck of the original weathered Dream. "Perfect," Eli replied, smiling at his daughter's attention to detail. In the months since the dramatic events at sea, June had blossomed. The quiet, overly serious child who had arrived in Harbor's End under the shadow of her mother's death and her father's financial struggles had transformed. She was still serious when the situation required, still wise beyond her years, but the weight of grief had lifted enough to allow glimpses of childhood joy to return. Sarah Mackenzie appeared from the direction of the small building that now housed the Maritime Museum, carrying a tray of document cases. Her position as liaison between the Maritime Heritage Foundation and the Federal Holocaust Art Recovery Program had kept her in Harbor's End much longer than originally planned. Neither Eli nor June had objected to her extended stay. "The Goldstein family just called," she announced. "Their flight landed in Portland. They should be here within 2 hours." "All of them?" Eli asked, feeling a flutter of nervous anticipation. "Sarah Goldstein, her son and daughter, and 3 grandchildren." Sarah set down the tray and adjusted her jacket. "They're very excited to see the Van Gogh landscape that hung in their Berlin apartment until 1938. It will be the first time Sarah has seen it since she was 8 years old." The Goldsteins were just the first of many families who would be making similar journeys in the coming months. The careful documentation Robert Mason had assembled over decades had allowed for the identification of 43 families whose art and cultural artifacts had been stolen by the Nazis and transported on the Santa Isabella. Each piece was being returned in a public ceremony, part of what Dr. Thornton had called visible justice. Not just the quiet restitution of property, but the public acknowledgement of historical wrongs and their correction. "Do I look okay?" June asked, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. She had insisted on wearing her formal clothes for the occasion, a blue dress her mother had bought her before getting sick, carefully preserved for special occasions. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Eli assured her. "Mrs. Goldstein is going to love you." The museum itself was modest, a repurposed boathouse that had once stored fishing equipment, but its contents were extraordinary. Display cases built to museum specifications housed photographs, documents, and smaller artifacts recovered from the Santa Isabella. Interactive screens allowed visitors to trace the journey of each piece from its original owners through Nazi confiscation to its transport on the ill-fated ship, and finally to its recovery and return. At the center of the main room stood an empty display case, waiting to temporarily hold the Van Gogh landscape before its return to the Goldstein family. "It's quite the transformation," came Murphy's voice as the old fisherman joined them on the pier. "Robert would be proud." "Of the museum?" Eli asked. "Of you," Murphy clarified, his weathered face crinkling into a rare smile. "He always believed you'd understand someday. Just didn't live to see it happen." The federal investigation into the Santa Isabella recovery had resulted in multiple indictments. Richard Blackwood had been charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder in connection with Robert Mason's death. Charles Whitman and several Meridian executives faced charges related to the illegal salvage operation and attempted theft of Holocaust artifacts. The trial was scheduled to begin in 3 months, with Eli as a key witness. But today wasn't about legal proceedings or criminal charges. Today was about fulfilling Robert Mason's ultimate goal, returning stolen heritage to the families who had lost so much. Chen emerged from the museum, leaning on her cane but moving with determined energy. In the months since the recovery operation, she had appointed herself unofficial historian of the Santa Isabella project, collecting stories from Harbor's End residents who had known Robert over the years, piecing together a more complete picture of the man Eli had never fully understood during his lifetime. "The news crews are setting up by the harbor entrance," she reported, "and Dr. Thornton just called. She's arriving with the Van Gogh in a secure transport vehicle. Everything is on schedule." The national media attention had been unexpected, but not unwelcome. The story of a small-town fisherman's 3-decade quest to recover Nazi-looted art, his mysterious death, and his son's completion of the mission had captured public imagination. More importantly, it had focused attention on the broader issue of Holocaust art restitution, pressuring museums and private collectors worldwide to examine their collections more carefully for items with questionable provenance. I still can't believe all of this came from one shipwreck, June said, looking around at the bustle of activity transforming Harbor's End. It was never just about the shipwreck, Sarah replied, kneeling to meet June at eye level. It was about justice, about setting right something that had gone terribly wrong. Your grandfather understood that some treasures are measured not by their monetary value, but by what they mean to the people who lost them. The finder's fee, as stipulated by maritime salvage law and the Holocaust Art Recovery Program, had indeed transformed the Mason family's financial situation. The 15% valuation of the recovered artifacts had amounted to $16, $5 million. More than enough to pay off Sarah's medical debts, secure June's education through college, and establish a foundation in Robert Mason's name dedicated to supporting maritime archaeology and Holocaust education. Eli had used a small portion of the funds to purchase a modest house overlooking the harbor, not far from Mrs. Chen's Victorian home. After years of financial struggle and transient living, having a permanent address, a real home, felt like a miracle to both him and June. But the money had never been the point. As they had learned more about Robert's work and the families affected by the Santa Isabella's cargo, both Eli and June had come to understand that the true value of what they had found lay in the connections restored, the history acknowledged, the wounds at least partially healed. A sleek black government vehicle pulled up at the harbor entrance, followed by two police escorts. Dr. Margaret Thornton emerged from the passenger seat, directing the careful unloading of a specialized art transport container. "Here we go," Sarah said, checking her watch. "Right on schedule." They gathered at the museum entrance as federal agents carried the container inside with practiced care. Dr. Thornton supervised the installation in the temporary display case, checking environmental controls and security measures before signaling that all was ready. "May I?" she asked Eli, gesturing to the container. "Please," he nodded. With ceremonial solemnity, Dr. Thornton unlocked the container and carefully removed its contents. The Van Gogh landscape emerged into the light, a small canvas in an ornate gold frame, depicting a rural scene with characteristic swirling brushwork. Though modest in size, perhaps 20 by 24 inches, its cultural and historical significance was immeasurable. "Countryside near Over, 1890, Dr. Thornton identified it. One of Van Gogh's final works, purchased by Heinrich Goldstein in 1928, displayed in the family's Berlin apartment until their forced emigration in 1938, confiscated under Nazi cultural protection laws, eventually loaded onto the Santa Isabella for transport." June approached the painting with reverent curiosity. "It's beautiful," she said simply. "I can see why they want it back." "It's not just beautiful," Sarah explained. "It's a connection to a world that was destroyed. For Sarah Goldstein, this painting is a tangible link to her childhood home, to the parents she lost in the Holocaust, to a life that was taken from her." As they stepped back to view the painting in its temporary home, Eli felt a wave of emotion he hadn't anticipated. The small canvas, vibrant with color and movement despite its age, represented everything his father had fought for. Not just artistic beauty or monetary value, but human connection and historical justice. A commotion at the harbor entrance announced the arrival of more vehicles, a small procession of cars bearing the Goldstein family. Harbor's End residents, who had gathered to witness the day's events, formed a respectful pathway from the cars to the museum entrance. From the lead car emerged an elderly woman, supported by middle-aged companions on either side, her children, Eli assumed. Despite her advanced age and the assistance she required, Sarah Goldstein carried herself with dignity, her eyes bright with anticipation as she approached the museum. Eli and June moved to meet her, standing together at the entrance. As the elderly woman drew near, Eli extended his hand. "Mrs. Goldstein, I'm Eli Mason. This is my daughter June. My father Robert is the one who found your painting." Sarah Goldstein took his hand in both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "Mr. Mason," she said, her voice carrying the faint accent of her German childhood. "Your father did more than find a painting. He found a piece of my past I never thought I would see again." Her gaze shifted to June, who stood slightly behind her father with uncharacteristic shyness. "And you, young lady, I understand you were very brave in helping to recover our family's treasure." June stepped forward, finding her voice. "My grandpa spent his whole life looking for it. I just helped finish what he started." Sometimes, Sarah Goldstein said with the wisdom of her 86 years, finishing what others begin is the most important work of all. Together, they entered the museum. As Sarah Goldstein approached the display case containing the Van Gogh, her children on either side, the room fell silent. Decades of separation, of loss and uncertainty, were about to end. The painting that had hung in a Berlin apartment witnessed the rising terror of Nazi Germany, traveled on a doomed ship, rested on the ocean floor for 70 years, and been meticulously documented by Robert Mason, was about to complete its journey home. Mrs. Goldstein stood before the painting, one hand pressed to her heart. "I remember this hanging in our front room," she said, her voice soft but clear. "My father would sit beneath it in the evenings, reading his newspaper. He loved the colors, the movement in the sky." She turned to Eli, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling. "Thank you for bringing it back to us." In that moment, Eli understood his father completely. The decades of searching, the careful documentation, the risks taken, all of it had been for this moment of reunion, multiplied by 43 families. Robert Mason hadn't been treasure hunting. He had been healing history. Later, as the day's formal ceremonies concluded and the Goldstein family departed with their recovered heritage, Eli, June, and Sarah stood at the end of the pier, watching the sunset paint Harbor's End in shades of gold and amber. "What happens now?" June asked, leaning against her father's side. "We continue," Sarah replied, her shoulder brushing against Eli's in a now familiar gesture of closeness. "There are more families, more artifacts, more stories to complete." "And then?" Eli asked, looking at her with the unspoken question that had been growing between them over the past months. Sarah smiled, her expression softening in the evening light. "And then we find new stories to tell, new mysteries to solve. Together, if that's what you both want." June looked up at them, her expression brightening with approval. "I think that's what Grandpa would want. And Mom, too." As darkness settled over Harbor's End, the lights of the museum illuminated the harbor, where generations of Mason men had sailed in search of fish, fortune, and finally justice. The weathered dream might rest on the ocean floor, but her spirit lived on in the work they continued and the family they were building. The weathered dream had become something new. Not an ending, but a beginning.